All right, let's go for it. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Cynthia Newman, and I'm the CEO and owner of Crank Marketing Group. I serve as Vice President of Communications for the Suncoast chapter of AUSA and Vice President of Communications for the Patent Foundation. Today, we are proud to present the 5th installation of our Pivot to Excellence Executive Symposia and Summit Series. Today's webinar is part 2 of 3 of the Yom Kippur War History and Perspectives. So as our moderators today, I am pleased to introduce Eric Lien, current president of the Suncoast chapter of AUSA in Tampa, and the past president of the European region, and Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army retired, Larry Jasper. And at this time, I would like to turn the virtual microphone over to Eric.
Thank you, Cindy. Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Lien. I'm the chapter president of the Suncoast chapter of the Association of the U.S. Army, and I'm the past president of the European region of AUSA. And about 8 years ago, I was talking with Brigadier General retired Gideon Avidor, and we were talking about we should do a symposium and a staff ride to Israel and talk about the Yom Kippur War and various military events in Israel's history. And it took us several years, but over time we put this webinar together. And in 2019, I met Larry Jasper of Jewish War Veterans at the Warrior Games in Tampa, and we started putting this webinar together. And it was late last year when we brought this to fruition. So after many months of working on it and a few years of thinking about how we could do it conceptually, we put it together. So right now we're in part 2. We're going to talk about the Southern campaigns of the Yom Kippur War from 1973. And part 3 will be next year, where we follow up with the actual staff ride to Israel. So at the end of today's webinar, we're going to hear from a travel agent who's a longtime friend, Christine Seller-Schwartz, who's going to tell us about what she's researched in the past couple of weeks about how that might be possible to do the trip into Israel next year and what some of the options are. So now I'm going to turn over the microphone to Larry, Command Sergeant Major Larry Jasper. There you go. Larry, you unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Eric, you gave a pretty good recap, so I'm not going to repeat it all. But I would like to thank the members of the Israeli Institute of Advanced Military Thinking for participating and making this happen. AUSA for partnering with us. General Swan and National Commander Jewish War Veterans Jeff Sachs for participating. And our wonderful Cindy Newman for being our facilitator. So thank you everybody for participating. And at this point, I think it's time to move on. General Swan, would you like to say something?
I would, Sergeant Major, thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm Guy Swan. I'm the Vice President of AUSA at the National Headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to participate in this very important series. I want to thank National Commander Jeffrey Sachs and Sergeant Major Jasper from the Jewish War Veterans for partnering with Eric and Cindy and our chapter in Florida, and our good friend Gideon Avidor and his team of experts at IAMT. Let me just start by offering my own personal thoughts and prayers for the people of Israel over the last couple of weeks. I think everyone on this call has been following the events in Gaza and in Israel, and we're thinking of you and hope all of you are safe who are speaking with us today. It's a reminder of the linkage that this series is all about, the lessons we've learned from the Israeli experience in wartime, and I'm sure there will be many lessons coming out of the most recent conflict as well. I told the group before we started, I had the great privilege of attending the West Point graduation yesterday up in New York. And it struck me that those cadets, now second lieutenants, were also watching the events in Israel over the last 2 weeks. much as I had watched the events in 1973 as a cadet at West Point. And they're going out into a world that's very uncertain. We were facing an uncertain world as we were joining the Army in the mid 1970s. And it struck me some of the parallels that we'll be talking about here today. You know, the 73 war, it's been discussed many times, generated a close working relationship between the IDF and especially the US Army, as well as the rest of the US military. But we're seeing that partnership in action as we speak today with initiatives like the Iron Dome missile defense system, a partnership between Israel and the United States. The Trophy, some of you are familiar with the Trophy active protection system that's on the Merkava tank, is now being installed on the US Abrams tank. And of course, the intelligence sharing, so important between our two nations, really was strengthened after the 1973 war. The Army I grew up in, and some of us online here throughout the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, was shaped by the events of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. So as we look at the events there, I'm also looking at it through the eyes of an American officer and what we have learned and continue to learn from our friends in the IDF and in Israel. So this is a great series. I want to thank everyone who's put this together, especially Cindy, who does all the work to get us to be able to meet with one another. And I'm looking forward to another great discussion as we had before. I think most of you know, while the tenuous events on the Golan in 73 were very monumental, the Israelis were also facing probably the most capable Arab army coming from Egypt in the southern sector, which will be fascinating to discuss today. So again, thank you everybody for participating. And Eric, back to you, or to Jeffrey Sachs. Let's hear from you, sir.
Okay, I guess that's my cue. Well, shalom. I'm going to say shalom because it's good morning across the United States and late afternoon in Israel. I'm Jeffrey Sachs, the National Commander of the Jewish War Veterans of the USA. We are currently celebrating our 125th anniversary, so we're a pretty old veterans organization. Thank you for joining us today. I wasn't supposed to say today. Okay, and for many of you joining us for this second part of the Yom Kippur War again. Yom Kippur War history and perspectives. The Yom Kippur War of October 1973 took place 48 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long, actually, because it doesn't seem that long to me, and that's how I realize I'm getting older. But similar to then, conflict broke out again just 2.5 weeks ago in Israel, with little warning, as usual, that it was about to happen. This is the fourth time in a decade that there's been conflict like this coming from out of Gaza with Hamas. Hamas fired 4,000, maybe more rockets at Israel in a period of less than 2 weeks. The IDF response was, well, I would have to say impressive. I mean, you have the Iron Dome, you have artillery, you have the Israeli Air Force with pinpoint precision strikes. We could hold a symposium just on the military feint Israel conducted with the help of the media. That was just amazing. I don't know if that's even probably still classified over there. I'm thankful that there's a ceasefire though, because I've got a lot of family in that area. And even when Bat Yam gets hit by rockets, they don't never thought that they could get hit there in Tel Aviv. But apparently those rockets are going further now. And even with a 90% success rate from the Iron Dome, some get through. So anyway, the ceasefire appears to be holding. We are thankful that we are able to hold our program today. Thank you also to the Suncoast chapter of AUSA and the Institute for Advanced Military Thinking for making this program possible, and to our panelists who fought the war and are sharing their experiences with us on this webinar. And it's not always easy to talk about your experiences. Remembering the morning of October 6, 1973, I was pre-military age, let's just say, a teenager at my synagogue. And like Jews around the world, I was fasting and atoning for my sins. and the talk at the synagogue during that day, because it's not always prayers at the synagogue. There's a lot of talk at the when you walk outside of the sanctuary, that Israel was under attack on the holiest day of the year. Well, remembering the '67 war, this lad thought to himself, "There's nothing to worry about. Those Arabs are going to be sorry again. There's no way the Egyptian army is going to make it across the Suez Canal and breach the impregnable Bar-Lev line. And Israel has the high ground in the Golan Heights. You need 1,000 tanks just to get through there." Well, events were to prove me wrong. And like the Maginot Line and the Siegfried Line before it in World War II, the Bar-Lev line, as we will learn today, was not impregnable, nor did it even delay the Egyptians for as long as the planners had thought it would. Now, I also didn't know back then how effective these new SAM-6, well, not new anymore, SAM-6 air defense systems would prove to be, how huge the Egyptian attack was going to be. And, leave it to engineers to come up with something novel like high pressure water cannons to breach a 60-foot high sand barrier of the Bar-Lev line. Now, on a side note, having served in Desert Storm, I will tell you sand barriers make for good containment of prisoners of war when you add concertina, because there's just no construction materials in the desert. Well, we look forward to hearing today from about the IDF Southern Command and the Suez Canal campaign, and how the IDF halted the Egyptian offensive and successfully counterattacked. Lessons from the Yom Kippur War are still applicable. To me, several takeaways, even in advance of this seminar, are that we need to guard against bias when we consider our enemy, because I didn't think that the Egyptians were going to be able to mount that formidable an offensive, but they did. From a strategic point of view, war is politics. Anwar Sadat knew that. He had a political endgame in mind. Golda Meir also knew that, and she could have launched a preemptive strike, but she opted not to, realizing that there would be no U.S. aid forthcoming to an aggressor, and she was right. Consider the post-war diplomacy too. Had Israel, once it rallied, destroyed the Egyptians' Third Army, which it had surrounded, it could have led to conflict between the U.S. and Russia and the loss of future diplomacy, as Egypt would have lost any national dignity it had regained from its Suez crossing days earlier. Well, let us now hear from the veteran officers of the Israeli Defense Forces who fought this war and helped to save Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, General Swan. We're going to start with the panelists now. And before we start with that, I'd like to ask all the panelists to have a look in the chat. In the chat, there are several questions that have been raised, posed to the panelists. And depending on who's speaking, you may want to address these questions. One question is, what is the service obligation of Israeli reservists today? Is it different from 1973? How was the recent mobilization of reservists for service in Gaza different from in 1973? Another question is, how close was the decision to release weapons at Dimona by Prime Minister Golda Meir? And one more question. Please add to the discussion the building of fortifications by the Egyptians on the Egyptian side of the canal prior to the start of hostilities, and the Jordanian king's solution to dissident military forces in his country. So we may have more questions during the course of our webinar, but they'll be posed in the chat bar, and if I see any new ones, we can pass these onward. So our first panelist is Brigadier General Gideon Avidor, and I've had the pleasure of meeting with him many times, and the last time we saw each other was in 2018 when we held an AUSA seminar for the CAPT group at the Ministry of Defense in Tel Aviv. So General Avidor, I'm going to turn it over to you. Here's the microphone.
Thank you, Eric. I'm honored to have this discussion, and actually the three meetings we planned and the opportunity to discuss it with you people. I want, before I start with my presentation, I would like to respond to two of the questions that was raised here. One question related to the reservists nowadays in Gaza. It's a very general remark. The war in 73 was very, very different for any war conducted now. It's not the same. It's not the same weapon system. It's not the same systems. 48 years pass, war is different. What remains is the spirit, the motivation, the professionalism. But everything regarding the formation, equipment, and other things, it's completely different nowadays. You can see Gaza was mainly fought by the Air Force. Different story, different wars, different organization. Another question was about the Egyptian fortification on the other side of the canal. They didn't fortify themselves against any invasion of our side. They built their springboard for the canal crossing. And they spent a lot of that and a lot of effort in that. I will not go more into that. So I will start now with this. The Yom Kippur in the Sinai.
Can you turn up the volume, please?
Of Division 252 headquarters, and the view of the successes and failures more than 40 years later. Division 252 was the only regular division in the IDF and was responsible for the Suez Canal sector. The sector, 200 kilometers wide and 100 kilometers deep. I was the Division G3. After the Six-Day War, Israel's defense strategy changed, moving from a preemptive approach to a defense approach first and offense as early as possible. This was the political directive. The military echelon translated this into a concept of defense with regular force, followed by a decisive attack deep into the enemy area and its strategic objectives. At the political level, it was Prime Minister Meir and her defense advisors, Moshe Dayan and Israel Galili. At the military level, the Chief of General Staff, Bar-Lev and Elazar, and at the tactical operational level were mainly Arik Sharon and Israel Katz. In the field, a regular armored division was established that claimed responsibility for the protection and readiness for an attack on the Suez Canal line. The sector divided into three sectors: North, Central, and South. Sadat replaced Nasser. His ambition, Sadat. Sorry. This one. The threat was Gamal Abdel Nasser's plan to retake Sinai. The Egyptian army generals told him, no way, the army needs reconstruction. But there was a plan, and against it, we were preparing. Nasser died in 1970. Sadat replaced Nasser. His ambitions were similar, but he listened to the generals, and he set the objectives at the mountain passes. The plan called Granit. We knew the problem, and the IDF built its fighting doctrine and the forces deployment against the Granit plan. On the left side, one can see the plan. On the right side is the doctrine as we knew it. That was the plan, crossing across the canal with infantry divisions, and according to Soviet warfare doctrine, breaking from a bridgeheads with armored forces towards the mountain passes. The IDF planning was not allowing Egyptians any success in the canal and be ready to move to the attack. 30 observation posts constructed along the canal, manned by 20-30 infantry soldiers. Step by step, we reinforce and build the strongholds as fortified positions. They were placed at the entrance of access where we thought the enemy would break through. At the rear of the canal defense line, tanks deployed to close the gaps between the strong posts and to push back the bridgeheads built for the armor breakthrough. It was a tank brigade on the line of contact and 2 tank brigades in the rear on standby to reinforce the line or counterattack at the bridge's head. A dirt ramp built along the canal, about 10 meters high, had tanks firing position on top and mines on the waterfront. It designed to protect the movement of the forces in our side and to make it difficult for the crossing forces to move to our area. 30 strongholds were built during the war of attrition, but later diluted in number to 16 strongholds. Warriors and weapons were removed from them, which intended to reinforce them upon receiving warning of coming war. That was a deployment and protection on the front line. Still, the IDF is preparing for an attack on a plan called Sakel, with 2 armored divisions deployed behind the front division, preparing to assist in. That was a deployment and protection on the front line. Still, the IDF is preparing for an attack on a plan called Sakel, with 2 armored divisions deployed behind the front division, preparing to assist in the defense if needed, but ready to move to an attack based on the front division fighting. Now let's talk about the war. A week before the war, the deployment on the ground was according to the plan. A brigade on the line of contact and 2 brigades in the rear. The reinforcement brigade from the Armor School 460 arrived during this week. The observation and strongholds constantly reported reinforcement of Egyptian forces on the banks and the concentration of crossing means. In our appeals to the General Staff and to the intelligence, what is the meaning of this? They told us to come down. This is an exercise. We have its plan. It's about to end soon. On October 6, 8:30, we conducted a briefing to update the brigade commanders. The commanders group dealt with the defense a little bit. Everyone was well aware of the plan, and we intended to discuss the transition to attack. At 9 o'clock, the division commander called to the phone with the Southern Command commanders. He came back after a few minutes and told us there is an alert that at 1800 something will happen It is unclear what. All options are open. We are not authorized to deploy the troops, but be prepared to enter your position at 1600. Disperse the meeting, go to your forces. At 12:30, we notified of an UN alert, spatial time check. We order the tanks to deploy outside the camps, but not to move to positions. At 13:55, an airstrike began on us, and flow messages of fire from all over the line. We ordered the brigade to move to their position and to open artillery fire. A war broke out. The forces began to move. The tank battalions in the line moved to the waterline and joined hands with the strongholds. The rear brigades moved forward. First, they destined to concentrate from behind until it became clear what was developing. It quickly became apparent that the front forces, even though they had reached the waterfront and joined the stronghold, could not stop the success of the Egyptian infantry. The 401 Brigade ordered to continue advancing and take the southern sector, to which it planned according to the Dove Code plan. 460 Brigade commanded to advance to the rear of the central sector. The battle continued. Call for help came strongly from the northern sector. The complex sector in terrain, wetlands, narrowlands, the city of Kantara. The tank battalion that poses the 9th battalions left with 2 fighting tanks and came down from the force. The 460 Brigade left the battalion to reinforce the central sector and rush north to assist the 275 Brigade. At that time, the division remained without reserve. All its forces invested in the line. During this time, we knew that the reserve division were coming tomorrow, and we were not fighting alone. In 2000, the division began to accumulate reports on the aftermath of the fighting and the success of the Egyptians. We understood that we would not be able to stop or repel the infantry. Still, we searched for the bridgeheads where the Egyptian armor has to move and break through. We ordered the brigade to stop running to the waterfront and organize behind the line and wait until dawn. But orders and reality are different things. When the battalions are fighting and the strongholds call for help, the fighting continues all night long. The cumulative situation in the division was catastrophic. Although the force first reached the waterfront and joined the strong point at the beginning of the fighting, and no strong point fell, the tank force badly damaged. In the graph here, you can see the dwindling tank force. The division began with about 290 tanks, and within a few hours, it had dropped to about 30% of its power. Not all of them destroyed in combat. Some subsided in mud, in unfamiliar terrain, and some were repaired later. But we continued to fight, regardless of the size of the force. As the tanks tried to repel the Egyptians, the strong points on the canal were encircled by large Egyptian forces, fighting for their life. Some strong points were rescued, some captured after a tough battle. Within 3 days of fighting, the Battle of the Strong Points ended, except for 2 strongholds on both ends of the sector. A Mediterranean-based stronghold, which we had access to, it lasted until the end of the war, and the stronghold on the southern end of the Suez Canal fought for 7 days until it ordered to surrender after we saw that we could not reach it to rescue it. After 2 days of fighting, the reserve divisions reached the sector. The battlefield divided into 3 sectors. Division 162 in the northern sector, Division 143 in the central sector, and Division 252 in the southern sector. Based on the IDF doctrine, an attack should be launched as soon as possible. And on October 8th, a counterattack was planned, with Division 162 attacking from north to south in its sector, and Division 143 moved to attack on the southern sector while Division 252 defends the sector. The attack began at 8 o'clock, and the report showed success. Division 143 left its post and moved south. At about 1100, it became clear that the attack had failed. Division 143 called back to its positions, some of which had already been captured by the Egyptians. After the failure of the offensive, the forces deployed in their sectors. Except for local attacks by the Egyptians and local attempts to retake territory in the 143rd Division sector failed, the situation was essentially static. The IDF war on that time focused on the Golan Heights. On October 14th, the Egyptian army went on the offensive with 5 tank brigades. We knew in advance about the approaching attack and waited for it. Within 3 hours, the Egyptians had lost 250 tanks. For example, on the right side, the battle in the 252 Division sector, where 2 brigades attacked. In the southern offensive, 2 tank battalions of the Egyptian 3rd Brigade were destroyed, with no tank damage to our forces. The day before, on October 13, 252 Division Commander Major General Albert Mendler killed while on patrol in the 164 Brigade sector, which was attacked by Egyptian force at that time. Towards the evening, the division got a new commander, Major General Herman McGinn. After the Egyptian offensive failure, the IDF launched the attack it was preparing for, crossing the canal and attacked the Egyptian army from its rear by 3 divisions. I will not enter to describe this stage of the war. It ended when we encircled the 3rd Army. Division 252 stabilized at 1 kilometer from Cairo and the port of Adabia, south of the city of Suez. It's a rolling bridge developed by the IDF towards the canal crossing back in 1972. Where did we go wrong? What didn't we know? Why did the defense fail at the beginning of the war? It began in November 1972 with a strategic decision by Sadat. Not a military objective, but political objective. Not running to the mountain passes, but a footstep in Sinai. The military battle chart remained the same. The content was different. We focused on the Egyptian armor in all our plans. We paid little attention to the Egyptian infantry. The division of 1971, as we knew it, was like the one on the left. In 1973, the Egyptian infantry division was utterly different. The Egyptian army designated it for anti-tank warfare, concentrated all the anti-tank devices in the Egyptian army into the 5 divisions, added 1 tank brigade from the armor division to it, and created a formidable anti-tank array which we didn't know and we did not prepare for. And it changed its doctrine with it. This was the Egyptian defense doctrine that we knew, Soviet line defense. This is how we fought against it in the 6-day war, in a narrow sector, penetrating to the rear of the formation and attacking it from behind. But the Egyptians have changed their perception. Not linear defense, but hedgehog-oriented defense against tanks. And there is no rear to penetrate. There was the Suez Canal. And in the first few days, attacking like we used to and paying a heavy price, we prepared to fight armor, not to fight the anti-tank array. Within few hours, we learned the lessons, but the price was heavy. We were well-prepared army, an army that even when it was surprised in many directions, in many ways, knew how to overcome, return to itself, and win a great military victory.
Now, well, I try to come back to the picture. Stop sharing.
If you click stop sharing in the Zoom screen at the bottom, there's a green button.
Okay, here we are. So that was very, in big terms, description of the war. From a very, let's say, high elevation viewpoint. I didn't went down to the details. That next speakers will talk. It was very hectic in the beginning. At the first days, we still were with the armor breakthrough, Egyptian armor breakthrough in mind, and we were looking for it, and we were waiting for it. And we saw the fighting against the Egyptian infantry as a must while the strongholds were there, but later on, we issue orders like, carefully attack, if someone can understand what that means. We realized that we didn't want to fight the infantry. We were not prepared for that. The IDF was built for something that at that time we developed a doctrine of armor versus armor. And the IDF was built to fight an armor and was excellent in that. So But there is another thing that happened. In the last few slides, I explained what we didn't do, and we find out while fighting. And we gain experience, but it takes time. And what 252 learned in the first 2 days, 162 learned after the attack at the October 8th, and 143 learned after the attack at the 9 and the 10. Meanwhile, a week passed till the message and the understanding go all over in the IDF. Then we waited to the armor attack that happened in the 14th. After we achieved that, the IDF could go and move to the attack, the form of fighting that it was ready for and was very good for, and the ability to end the war with victory. That's it for the moment. Eric, away.
General Avidor, I have a question from Rob Risberg, Colonel Retired Rob Risberg. He asks, what lessons did you learn in terms of fire support and the employment of your artillery and air-to-ground fires?
Well, in the bottom line, the lesson will learn that we were wrong. In 1968, when the decision were taken to build an army for the attack, priority were listed by the Chief of General Staff, started with Walev and continued with Elazar. We build an army for an attack that it will be based on Air Force and armored divisions and some paratroops. That's first priority. Second priority, we're not spending money on is artillery, engineering, everything that doesn't kill. So before the war, we thought a lot. We recalled the Air Force as flying artillery. In all our plans, we plan on the Air Force. The Air Force was supposed to stop the Egyptian from crossing. Do you remember the idea was armor crossing? Armor columns will pass and then the Air Force will hit them on the bridges and that didn't happen. It didn't happen because the Air Force was moved from north to south, south to north, because the situation was different. We were lacking firepower. When we attacked the infantry at the beginning, we didn't have an artillery fire. In the division, we had 5 battalions at the start of the war, 60 barrels. On 160 kilometers, 5 infantry division coming. All we had, 16 barrels, most of them supporting the strong points that was left alone. So we didn't have enough firepower. And we suffered from that a lot.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? General Swan, Jeffrey, Larry?
Actually,
Nope, we're
I'm
good.
kind of curious about why the divisions are numbered so highly, 252 division instead of like 2nd Armored Division or 1st Infantry Division like we have. I'm just was wondering why the difference is like that.
Sorry? Ask again? I didn't understand.
Your division designations have high numbers. Why is that?
I don't know why we figure out those numbers, but it's just numbers. No significance there. For the number is more kept for tradition and historical on the brigade level, not that much on the division level. We had the 7th Brigade, the 14th Brigade, the 401, and it's maintained nowadays. Nowadays, some divisions still maintain the old division from Yom Kippur War. But so it starts later on. There is an heritage to maintain and things like that. So, but at that time, it was just a number. Remember, that was the first regular division, the 252. Beforehand, we have only headquarters, no divisions. It was division headquarters that were assembled forces for an operation. The regular division was 252, the first one.
Thank you. Toda rabba.
Gideon, and on the northern campaign, the other Arab armies participated at a low level, mostly Syrian, but some others. Were there any others that participated on the southern front, or was it totally Egyptian forces?
If I remember, there were Pesach. You can tell it about it later on. But we have Pesach on the other side. Pesach, do you have an answer?
Yes, the idea was, or the agreement was, that this war is a pan-Arab war. And not only Egypt and Syria will participate, they are the main partners of the war, but other countries will also send their assistance. The Iraqis sent a force in the size of a corps, army corps, 2 armored divisions and 3 infantry brigades, which is again a kind of a division. And to Syria also, the King of Jordan sent at the beginning a tank brigade and later another tank brigade in the headquarters of an armored division also. And later we found also forces coming not to Syria. There was a Saudi Arabia brigade, a Kuwaiti brigade, a Moroccan brigade that arrived to Syria before the war and participated from the beginning. And later we found also forces, when Assad was afraid that we are going to take Damascus, he asked for help from all of his friends. From Pakistan arrived forces, from Cuba arrived forces to man a tank battalion. And also I found information that North Korea sent also some forces for air defense, and of course pilots also from Cuba and from Pakistan. In Egypt, they had forces from Libya, from Algeria, a Tunisian battalion, also a Moroccan brigade. The King of Morocco said he was a good friend of ours, but he sent the brigade to Syria and to Egypt. There was a Sudanese brigade, and more or less this was, and small other items of forces, not so important, but this was to show that this war is the unified pan-Arab war. Everybody has the right to participate and to send its forces. Some of the countries also participated by sending money and so on. For example, Gaddafi of Libya, he was the sponsor, he bought the boats for the Egyptian infantry that crossed the canal at the start of the war. And of course, he gave them a squadron of Mirage that he bought from France. There were 2 squadrons, one with Egyptian pilots who trained in France as being Libyan pilots, but the French knew exactly what happened there. And the other one was a Libyan squadron with Libyan pilots, and also surface-to-air, French type surface-to-air launcher missiles, and many other things. So all this was one big thing, so that the Egyptians and Syrians will not feel that they are alone, but all the Arab world is standing with them. Also the Saudis, as you know, organized the oil embargo, and this was in general the picture.
Thanks, Pesach. I don't think that's well known by a lot of people. Most feel it was just the Syrians and the Egyptians.
And we have also the Soviets in this.
And the Soviets, yeah,
I don't know if people know, but the Soviets sent at the end, the second part, towards the end of the war to Syria, a Soviet SA-6 brigade with Soviet crews to defend Damascus. And they left in 74, I believe they left, leaving the missiles for the Syrian army. And they used also, they had in Syria an EW force on ground and on air, and Antonov aircraft that they used at the beginning of the war to jam our Hawk missile radars in order they will not operate against the Syrian aircraft.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Eric, we can move on.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you very much. And that was very enlightening. I think that was very enlightening for a lot of our viewers to see the extent of the Soviet involvement including the entire Soviet bloc and the Arab world. I think that's not so widely known.
I will relate to it later in more details.
Correct. So now our next panelist is Major General retired Emauel Sakel. He was at the time of the Yom Kippur War a lieutenant colonel in the 52nd Tank Battalion. And he's going to tell us about the battalion commander perspective. Sir, are you ready to take over the microphone? General Sakel? I hand you the microphone. I think we have to unmute you.
You have to click on the little microphone in the bottom left to unmute yourself.
Do you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. As Gideon described the wide picture of the war, I will be concentrated on the level of the battalion with my personal story. I would say from my tank turret, which is a special angle of view. I was nominated as the commander of the 52nd Battalion at May 72. And the 52nd Battalion is a very famous unit in the IDF since the War of Independence. It was a pure tank battalion, 32 M48A3 tanks. Half a year before it was in 3 companies, A, B, and C. Half a year before the war, I had a mechanized infantry company which was dismantled according to the concept of the government and the general staff that since there is quiet on the lines and there's like peace, we can cut the budget of the IDF and we can cut units, etc., etc. There were plans to close the 14th Brigade, to close the 252 Division, and even to cut the service in half a year. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it didn't happen, but many things were wrong according to the concept of the IDF order of battle. The first week of October 73, my battalion, just for the background, Gideon and me were changing position. I was in the 14th Brigade, he was in the 401 Brigade, he was the commander of the 46th Battalion, and he told me many of the secrets of the Southern Command when we changed each other. On the first week of October, I was at the end of a 3-month period of employment along the southern sector of the canal. But due to the tension that was in the air, this replacement of 401 to the 14 was postponed. Nobody knew exactly to what time, but it was postponed. I will show you the sector of my brigade, just to have the feeling where we were. Share screen. It doesn't work. Share. Okay. Here you can see the serious map. My sector was from this line more or less of the Bitter Lake. I had about 26 kilometers of the Bitter Lake. I had about the same distance of the canal from the shore of the big lake until the city of Suez. And then I have 50 kilometers of the Gulf all of it in the responsibility of a tank battalion with no infantry and nothing like that. I had, in my responsibility were 6 strongholds from the here to here, and the stronghold we called Mauzim, where the soldiers in the Mauzim were not the elite units like Golani Brigade or the Para-2 Brigade. There were plans in the IDF general staff that at time of tension, they will be replaced by Golani or Para-2 Brigade. It didn't happen. In the northern part of my battalion, there was a reserve unit from Jerusalem, and the southern part were Nahal soldiers, not elite unit, I would say, without insulting anybody. About the Dovecote, the plan Dovecote, Gideon explained, I will not return. According to our plan in the Dovecote, the 3 companies have to come out of their camps, the Tauzim, the camps. A company was responsible to the area of the Mezach. You see, this is the Mezach, the pier against opposite Port Taufik. And the 2 tanks have to enter the Mezach itself. B company had to send a platoon to Ras Sudar, far south to Ras Sudar, which is a multi-unit camp about 50 kilometers from here. And the company had the responsibility of defending the stronghold opposite the Mitle road. The 3rd company, C, has the responsibility of defending the area of the GD where it meets the canal highway. And this was the Dovecote of my battalion. The Egyptian preparation were clear, and they were done during the last days of September and the first days of October. The Egyptians were breaking the stony edge of the canal, the stony bank of the canal, in order to enable the crossing of amphibious vehicles opposite our eyes. And when they cleared mines, and we saw at night long convoys coming with ICAPs, with artillery, with tanks, with crossing equipment, and they came back with full light just to confuse us. And when we asked the brigade, and the brigade asked the division, what does it mean? The answer was exercise. Exercise that should be terminated, ended at the 6th of October. And you know the story. And October 5th afternoon, I was called to the headquarters of the 14 brigades in Tassa. Tassa is here. This is Tassa. I called to the 14th brigade. It was a group order. And there was nothing special in this group order. It was Erev Yom Kippur, Eve of Yom Kippur. But the main thing that I was told in this order group that I am going to give the southern part of my sector from here to Ras Sudar to an infantry battalion of division 424. It doesn't matter. When I came back to my camp in the Mitle. My camp was here in the Mitle. I came back. I fast in Yom Kippur. So I even have the time to call to my wife. She is sitting next to me, and told her Chatima Tova. You know what is Chatima Tova? Having a good year. How are the children, etc., etc. And since I know that the best way to finish the fast is to sleep. So I went to sleep in my wagon in the Mitle, and I slept like a baby. Even though at that time, in the pit in Tel Aviv, everybody was rushing like hell, preparing for war, but we were told nothing. And the activity along the canal was as regular as a regular day. All the checking of the road between the stronghold, nothing special. Nobody told us that there is going to be a war. At 10 o'clock, somebody knocked on my door of the wagon. Sir, you have to be in Tassa at 12 this day in the 14th Brigade, again to an order group. So I took my Jeep, and rushed to the TASA, and we were told to be ready for dovecote at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. What is 6 o'clock? It's the H hour for something. Nobody knew exactly what H hour for what, for war, for attrition war, for end of the exercise. At 10 minutes before 12, the commander, Amnon Reshef, was called to the telephone, and he came back and he said, you have to do, to deploy dovecote now, just now. And I rushed to the telephone and I talked with the deputy in the Mitle and told him to order the companies, the 3 companies and the six Mauzim to do the deployment of dovecote now. I remember when I left the headquarters in TASA, the soldier girls, pale as the wall, asked me, is there going to be a war? And I told them something like that, and I rushed to my command. I took my tank at Ta'oz Notza, somewhere here, to Ta'oz Notza here, and I rushed with the G3 prepared the tank. I entered the turret and we rushed straight to the Mefatzeach, the junction of the Mitle and the lexicon, what we call the highway of the canal. We were welcomed by heavy fire. There was I would say, light weapon on my turret, like drops of rain. RPGs were shot at me, and missiles from the other side, from the high ramps that the Egyptian built, and we called it pyramids. And just as I came to the company, which was in a heavy battle, one of my tanks was burning left to me, and it shocked me to see one of my tank, which is burning. It got some, I think, RPG. So the situation was not easy because the company commander was killed at 4 o'clock and the deputy got control of the company. And I understood there is no way to fight the Egyptian soldiers. Just to know that the Egyptian soldiers, elite unit, they crossed the canal just at 1400. They crossed the canal and they put themselves on our ramps, especially in A company and B company. And since the tanks need about 20 minutes or 15 to 20 minutes to come from the Tauzim, the camps here, when the tanks came in A and B sectors, they were met by heavy fire of Egyptian soldiers, as I told you, RPG and light weapon, etc. And most of my losses in the battle were these hours of fighting in A and B company. C company on the GD pass was lucky because there are no ramps, artificial ramps. The position were in dunes, so nobody caught their position, and they had a very famous battle here. At the 131 Marine Brigade, Egyptian Marine Brigade, landed here at the end of the Bitter Lake, and one platoon of the C company, one platoon with 3 tanks, hit heavily the 131 Brigade and destroyed their plan to come and block the exits of the GD and the Mitle, which were the exit of the 401 Brigade that was supposed to come from the east to help us in the fighting against the Egyptian. And I just want to say that when I asked Amnon Reshef at 12 o'clock, what happened with the 401 Brigade? Is it coming from the back? He told me no, because there is a fear of escalation. This is the word that General Gunen, rest in peace, was using to explain why he didn't move the 401 Brigade forward as the Dovecote plan said. So as I told you, when I came here, the battle was very heavy. And I understood that without infantry, I cannot do anything. So I called my deputy in the city of the Mitle, and I told him to send me immediately the reconnaissance unit, which was in my sector, and there's an elite mechanized infantry unit. So at about 16:30, the reconnaissance company came to me, and we made the first counterattack in Yom Kippur War. 2 tanks, one is mine, and the second is the deputy of B company that replaced the dead commander, and 4 APC. We went to the canal road, and we shoot the Egyptian soldier from the back, from the west to the east. And those who were not killed just ran back to the canal, and quiet, relative quiet, was in the sector. This success gave impression in the division, and Gideon knows it better than me, that all the situation is under control, which was not. In my sector, I was successful. Now, so at the time of Shat Ne'ilah, which is the end of the day, I told the commander of the reconnaissance unit, because I knew that some observation soldiers are in the Mefatzeach Aleph and Mefatzeach Bet, the abandoned towers, abandoned mauzim, abandoned stronghold at their observation point. And I knew that Israeli soldiers were captured in these 2 strongholds, abandoned stronghold only for use for the daytime. So I told him, take your company and go opposite the entrance to the Mefatzeach A, and it will be dusk. When it will be dark, enter and evacuate the soldiers. What I didn't know that these soldiers used the time of, they were very lucky, they escaped from Mefatzeach A, and they didn't need any evacuation. But unfortunately, the commander got a direct hit on his APC, M113, he was killed with another 4. So the reconnaissance unit has to withdraw. At that time, the deputy of B collected all the remains of the company because had heavy losses, the company has heavy losses. And in fact, I remained alone on the ramps from about 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And I received heavy artillery fire and heavy Katyusha rockets. The junction was trembling, and I remained alone on my position on the junction of the canal and Mitle Road. At about 8 o'clock, I was called on the radio from the deputy of 401 that 401 is coming to the sector, and the sector is going to divide it into 3. I will remain in the central part, in the Mitle Road. The 46th Battalion will take the northern part with my C company, and 195 company, 195 division will take the southern part with my A company. And I was told that a company from the 196, 995 is coming to reinforce me. At about 8:30 in the evening, it was dark, of course. I heard the tanks of the C company coming of 195, and I saw the ICAT of the tanks rushing to me to help me, to reinforce me on the junction of the canal, and I was sure that we will win the war. When the company came, I took the commander with another 3 tanks, and I entered Mefatzeach Bet to try to evacuate the soldiers that I knew that were captured in Mefatzeach Bet. We did it under heavy fire. We entered the Maoz, we cut the engines, and I shouted, "Is there anybody here? Is there anybody here?" No one answered. And we moved back. Later, about 2 years ago, there was a meeting of the Maozim soldiers, and I was told that the 3 soldiers from Mefatzeach Bet are here. And they told me that they didn't hear me. I don't believe them. They were afraid to get out of the bunker, and they remained in the bunker and fell as prisoners the day after. During the night, we were ordered to go to the canal to shoot at crossing boats of the Egyptian south of Mefatzeach. And we had many entrances, dangerous one between the mines that I knew very good, the mines and the smoke and the fences. And we got to the canal, and the canal was clear and quiet because the Egyptians were smart enough. They knew our drills before the war, and they were crossing, they were bridging the canal north of the Mausim where no tanks were at that time. In the daylight, the situation was just the same. We got missiles, Sager missiles from the ramps on the other side. Many Egyptian soldiers were running in the area. It was clear that it is impossible to go to the Mausim anymore. No way to come to evacuate the Mausim. It was clear because it was suicide to go to the Mausim. So at 9:59 in the morning, I got the order to break contact with the Mausim and go back to the east. I tell you frankly, it was the most difficult order that I got in the war. Just before this, there was a fake news or fake radio alert from the Maoz that there is a gas attack. And you can understand how hysteric the Southern Command was and the pit in Tel Aviv, but later it was told that it was not a gas attack. From this position, about 6 kilometers from the canal, I launched another counterattack at about noon at 1 o'clock with 4 or 5 tanks of the C Company of 195. We went to the Madonna. Here is the statue of the Victoria, Queen of England. And from this place, I had the honor to hit with APDS, with great satisfaction, to hit the first Egyptian tanks from the 19th Division. In the afternoon, the commander of the brigade, Dan Shomron, sent me back to reorganize at this line on the road, Kvish HaRochav, we called it the Rochav line. And we came back to this position, 3 tanks. It is known in the folklore of the brigade, the 3 tanks, whatever, at that night, but in the morning we were 14 tanks. And this number of 14 tanks were more or less the number of the tanks that I had all over the war. There came many tanks from the position and so on, and many tanks were evacuated, many tanks were fixed, and I got the 14 tanks. Don't forget that the C Company was under the command of the 46th Command. At the 8th of October morning, I was sent by Dan Shomron. I would say that after breaking contact with the Mausim, which is inevitable order, we began to act again as a tank battalion. And in the 8th and 9th of October, we inflicted heavy losses on Egyptian tanks. At the 8th, and especially in the 9th of October, I must say, humble, that in 20 minutes, we destroyed a Egyptian tank battalion, 25 tanks. We burned them in 20 minutes. I had the pleasure to evacuate an Israeli pilot of Skyhawk who had to abandon his aircraft. He was hit by a missile. And we were controlling the plan of the canal. No problem. It was in the area of Karat Mura, about here. Unfortunately, we got an order to go back to the artillery road, and because of a mistake, severe mistake, in the brigade and division level, we lost Karat Mura, which was the eyes of the southern sector to the Egyptian, and we didn't get it back all over the war. On the days from the 9th to the 14th, we were at defense line against the Third Army, 2 battalions in front and 1 battalion in the back. In the 14th, as Gideon told you, there was the counterattack, the Egyptian counterattack, and the Egyptians were hit very severely. They lost 250 tanks, and the wheel of the war changed direction. Before that, I was stupid enough to make, in the 12th of October, a solo attack into Egyptian line. And how I succeeded to go back, I don't know. I was lucky to get back. At the 14th of October was the Egyptian counterattack. It was known as the pressure of Assad and so on and so forth. And the 15th, in the central sector, there was the crossing of the canal, the Operation Abirei Lev, and the 14th Brigade, by the leading of Colonel Reshef, was the lion's share of this battle. I am proud about that, even though we didn't take part in that. In the 18th or in the 19th, the 401 Brigade told to join 252 Brigade, to join the 252 Division, and my brigade left me to hold alone against the 3rd Army. With my battalion, I was against the whole 3rd Army in this sector, and the 401 joined the attack of the T-52 and joined the Operation Abirei Lev of Division 162 and 143. Ceasefire was the 22nd of October. And in the morning, I was told to give the sector to another battalion, Reserve Centurion Battalion, and I have to cross the canal. I led my battalion, and we crossed the canal south of Faid, and we were under the command of the Southern Command, and we were deep in Katzatzin plains here, somewhere here, between Division 143 and Division 252. And the ceasefire was on the 24th noon. You know, of course, that there was still a heavy battle in the city of Suez with 80 casualties. And the last bullet was shot at 25th at dawn. Few days after that, I was joining my brigade that was next to Adabiyeh. The 401 arrived in Adabiyeh the night of the 23 in the evening. I joined my brigade at the 101 kilometer. You know the 101 kilometer? The 101 kilometer, and I got the northern sector, and preparing a line of defense against Egyptian and Moroccan troops. In my sector, there were Moroccan troops and fighting together with the Egyptian forces. This is more or less the fighting of my battalion. At February 74, Dan Shomron asked me if I will come to be his deputy. I said that I am proud about that. I became the deputy of the 401 Brigade. He called me the reconstruction minister. And there was a lot of work to do reconstructing the 401, and I did it with open heart in Africa or in Tassa when we came back to Tassa at the end of February or beginning of March, I don't remember, and we came back to Tassa, and this is the end of the story of my Kippur, of my battalion and the brigade. That's it.
You will need to stop sharing your screen.
I'll try to take away the map.
Look at the top of your screen. There you go.
Yep, perfect. Thank you very much. That was amazing. That's just a breathtaking account, and it's amazing what your troops went through, what you guys went through, the amount of courage that it took to fend off all of those forces. Does anybody have any questions? Would anybody like to ask General Sakel any questions?
I just want to answer you that I have problem with my ears as a big tanker, as a good tanker. I am handicapped. So my wife is giving me description of what you said. So forgive me if I ask her, what did you say? Okay?
It's okay. No problem.
I'm a handicap of the IDF. Forgive me. What was the question, Mausha? I just want to tell you one thing, that in the 1 week before the war, when we saw everything that the Egyptians were doing just before our eyes, nobody came from the general staff, not General El-Azhar, not his deputy, Tal, not the chief of intelligence. They didn't come to see what is happening. They can come with helicopter, going to the front sector, see what's happening, going to the central, go to my sector and see by their own eyes. Nobody came, okay? And El-Azhar told Vadat Agranat that he didn't have time at that week. He remembered that he had something in the schedule, but he didn't remember why did he canceled it to visit the canal. Yes, it was a difficult war, and the people were excellent. The war was won not by the generals, not by the chief of staff, not by Tel Aviv. The war was won by simple soldiers, by platoon commanders, by simple infantry and tankers who just didn't want to give up. And they fought from the first hour to the last hour, and we finished at the 101 kilometer on the road to Cairo. Hi, Oded Megiddo, shalom.
היי,
אהלן. מתי הופעת?
לא הופעת?
Oded Megiddo is an old colleague. He was a company commander in the 52 Battalion 2 years before the war. That's right? 2 years.
Right.
C company, לא? ג'.
היי.
איך?
היי.
A company. Okay, my mistake. Hi, Oded.
So do we have any questions for General Sakel before we turn over the microphone? I think that was breathtaking. That was a beautiful account, and we're so glad that we got to record this. Let's see. Oh, here's a question that came through. Here's a couple of questions. Following the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, did you have any contact with your former opponents in the Egyptian army?
Gideon and me were together in Fort Leaven Wars. Okay, 77, 78. We were friends many years ago. And there were talks about the visit of Sadat in Israel in November 77. And there was an Egyptian officer at our course, Commander General Staff. And there were Jewish people from Kansas City that told us, can we make a contact between you and him? And we said, thank you. At the time it will happen. No, I don't have any connection with Egyptian officers. Sorry, no.
Okay.
And I didn't visit Egypt either.
So here's another question. Did the US M48A3 tanks that you used perform well overall? Did the US tanks perform well overall?
Excellent. I had the best tankers in the world. The tanks were, there were excellent tanks. Excellent tanks. There was the number one, not exactly number one, because there was M60 in the reserve unit, like Oded Megiddo have M60, M60A1. נכון? היה לכם M60?
No.
No, okay. Reserve units had M60 already, coming
I'll
from...
talk about it.
בבקשה?
I'll talk about it.
Okay. We had the M48A3 and the 105 millimeter, the diesel. They were excellent maneuvering. The gunnery was excellent. I loved them very much. And the tankers were the best in the world.
Have you got, after the webinar, could we get a copy, an English version, a written version of your story? Like a written account that we could share?
Yes, there is a book that was translated from Hebrew to English. And it's called, I will bring it in a minute. It was called A General Account of Yom Kippur War. I don't like the name, but I gave a lecture in Washington, DC in 2014. And in a minute, I will take the book from the the second and show it. Okay?
Okay, perfect. That's wonderful.
She said you can get it, you can buy it on Amazon.
That's a perfect answer.
And Steve Fixler,
Eric,
one of our
it was-
attendees just said.
It was published by AUSA. The book of General Sakel was published by AUSA.
Kentucky University Press.
General Sakel was speaking at the AUSA annual meeting in 2014. And
Yes.
was his book available at the, was
Yes.
he at the authors?
Yes.
It was available in 2014.
Yeah.
It was available. Here is the
Listen, this is the book. You see it?
Wait. Hang on. There.
Okay. Listen, AUSA helped me by Gideon Avidor. I'm going to say not nice things. KUP, Kentucky University Press, is the press where this book was published. And they have difficulties every year of paying me my royalties. Every year they have problems. This year I told Gideon, please call our friend in AUSA and tell them that it's not nice, that KUP is not paying the royalty as they should do. By miracle, this talk of Gideon by AUSA helped. Let's see what will happen next year. This is the book. Soldier in the Sinai, a general account on Yom Kippur War. This is a picture of me on the 7th of October sitting on my turret, not exactly happy, as you can see.
So General
Okay.
Sakel, Steve.
Yeah, this picture was taken by, it's a real picture, taken by the deputy of the B company at the 7th of October or the 8th of October morning. You see, this is the canal, and this tank hit another Egyptian tank on the other side.
Wow.
That authentic picture by the Avi Gur, what was the deputy of Company B. He took pictures all the war, during the war.
General Sakel, Steve Fixler just bought your book on Amazon, and he's asking if you could sign his copy when he comes to on the trip next year to Israel.
הוא יבוא לארץ, וכאן אם תוכל לחתום לו על הספר.
With pleasure. How about
Perfect.
you, Cindy? You want the book?
Absolutely. I would love a book.
All of you have to buy the book.
Perfect.
Okay.
After I
Tell
finish
KUP to
moderating-
pay the royalty.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir.
My
We
pleasure
heard-
to be with this honored company.
It's a great honor to have such expert guests telling us about their history and about what went on. We are going to have Lieutenant Colonel Oded Megiddo speak now.
Oded בהצלחה.
Thanks.
He, at the time of the war, was a
Let's
captain
go.
זהו.
and commander of a tank battalion. And he is going to tell us about the battle for the central sector.
Hello, everybody.
Here's,
Yep.
I'm handing you the microphone.
Thank you. And hello, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to present my point of view of the Yom Kippur War experience based on my personal experience as a reserve tank company CEO, as well as on extensive research I have been conducting in the last 6 to 7 years. I'm going to talk about the course of the war of the division in which I served, the 143rd Armored Division, Ariel Sharon's division, and combine it with glimpses of my personal experience in the war. In October 1973, I was a 24-year-old student of economics in Tel Aviv University. I was released from the army 2.5 years earlier having completed command of a regular tank company in Sinai, A company of the 52nd Battalion, like Emauel just said. And I was just a student living in Tel Aviv. On the morning of October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur, I received a phone call from my reserves unit telling me that we have been mobilized and I should come to the reserve stores at Sde Teiman near Beersheba. I called my deputy, Yossi Klein, and we drove to the south. When we got there, I learned that our battalion had no tanks at all. Two of the tank companies were to receive tanks that had been left behind by the Armored School Tank Commanders course in Shifta. I was to go to the Ordnance Corps training base in Tzrifim, Central Israel, to collect 10 tanks that had been held there for training maintenance personnel. When I arrived in the Ordnance Corps school, I found the tanks were dismantled. Hulls in the mechanics department, engines in the engines department, and turrets in the turrets department. It was clear that these tanks won't be ready for war in the next 36 hours. I drove to Tel Aviv to get to a telephone. There were no cellulars at that period. And I called the brigade CO in Sde Teiman, and he told me to go to the main Armored Corps workshops in Julis, near Ashkelon. There I was to get 10 tanks that had been brought there sometime earlier for periodical maintenance. So I drove to Julis, found the 10 tanks, found 10 tank transporters waiting to deliver them to the battalion's staging area in Shifta, and we arrived there early in the morning of the 7th. I will stop here and I won't tell you the long story of how we got hold of ammunition, radio equipment, and general tank equipment. I'm telling you all this only so you get a picture, a very partial picture, of the chaos in which we, the reserve units, had to organize for battle on the Yom Kippur War. Our brigade, the 421st Tank Brigade, was a new brigade which had organized only in early 1973. We had 1 week of battalion training maneuvers in April, but we were all seasoned tankers, veterans of the war of attrition on the Canal Front between 1968 and 1970. Some of us, especially officers, were veterans of the 6 Days War. The brigade's CO was Colonel Chaim Erez. You see him in the picture. In later years, he was the commanding general of the Southern Command and the chief of the logistic branch. We had only 22 tanks in the reserve stores. So these were allocated to 2 companies of the brigade's 2nd Battalion, the 599th, and the brigade and the 599th Battalion Tactical Command Posts. The brigade was extremely short on other equipment, such as half trucks for the armored infantry companies, jeeps, command cars, trucks, and critical equipment such as machine guns and binoculars. Anyway, the mobilized reserve men started to arrive at Sde Teiman early in the evening. We had 1 platoon commander who arrived all the way from his kibbutz in the Golan Heights, Elron, which had nearly been overrun by Syrian tanks. The first contingent of 22 tanks left Sde Teiman at dawn of October 7th after they have been manned, equipped with armament, ammunition, radios, and general equipment. The 2 other battalions and the 599th 3rd Company scattered all over the south of Israel, collecting tanks and equipment, and then the units drove between 300 and 360 kilometers on tank tracks to the various staging areas in the front. Here you can see the route that most of the units had to drive on tracks. The blue arrow represents the 162nd Division, and the light blue represents our division. And actually, you don't even see the whole length of the arrows because some units came from further north. At dawn of October 8th, our brigade, still short of a lot of fighting equipment, assumed responsibility and deployed in positions in the northern subsector of the central sector of the front as part of the deployment of Ariel Sharon's 143rd Division. Here you can see the division's deployment at dawn, October 8th. This was accomplished 44 hours from the mobilization order. October 8th was the third day of the war, and it was the day that the reserve divisions took over after two days of bitter fighting by the regular Sinai division, the 252nd, which Emauel described before, who had to grapple with the crossing of 5 Egyptian infantry divisions heavily equipped with anti-tank weapons. October 8th saw the first major IDF counterattack by the 162nd Division, commanded by General Avraham Adan Bren, which was a total disaster. What should have been a full divisional attack was carried out as 2 separate assaults, each one by understrength tank battalion, by 1 understrength tank battalion, without air, artillery, or infantry support. The outcome was a large number of casualties, including personnel caught as POWs by the Egyptians, one of them a battalion CO, and the loss of scores of tanks. The blue arrow here is the course, shows the Brent's attack, the 162nd Division's attack, which failed. Our division, the 143rd, was sent on a wild goose chase from the central sector to the southern sector and back. So it was essentially totally wasted most of the day. Gideon already described this. You see our movement, we went all the way down to some units arrived at the Mitle Pass area, some units only made it to the Gidi Pass area, and then we drove all the way back to the central sector. There was not much reason for all this. We'll not get into it now. Personally, when we got back from our fruitless drive to the southern sector, I was sent to deploy on positions on a dune codenamed Hamutal. I was not told, and nobody in the battalion knew, that it had been the site of a recent battle, less than an hour earlier, in which the Egyptian 112th Infantry Brigade had repulsed an assault by our 500th Brigade from the 162nd Division, causing it heavy casualties and abandonment of 9 tanks in the field, some with injured crew members inside. As we ascended the target, which was an elongated dune hill of about 2.5 kilometers depth, it was already getting dark. We were received by a barrage of anti-tank fire. Almost immediately, my deputy's tank was hit, and as I was trying to reach it, I was also hit, and a 3rd tank in the company was hit. We had no machine guns at all in the company, neither coaxial nor commander's machine guns, and no binoculars. We were groping our way literally in the dark, with only cannon fire to shoot at unseen targets. I myself was wounded, as was my gunner. The tank was disabled. I changed to another tank, and I was contemplating with my battalion CO how to continue and what reinforcement he would send me. When he received an order from Erez, the brigade CO, to disengage and drive back to the brigade's lines behind us. We left my deputy's entire crew on Hamutal. I was thereafter evacuated together with my gunner. Imagine you are practically chasing the war for more than 48 hours. You have driven over 450 kilometers with your tank, including this drive to the south and back. And when you finally get to it, in less than half an hour, your company is shattered and you leave your friends behind. It was quite a shock. By the way, I studied the history of the 4th US Armored Division when it was diverted from Lorraine to Bastogne in December 1944. They drove 250 kilometers, just for comparison. October 8th was a day of total chaos in which the Israeli High Command, GHQ, and Southern Command totally lost control of the situation. In all the day's battles, both reserve divisions encountered the strong anti-tank alignment which the Egyptians managed to establish along the entire front, consisting of a plethora of weapons from RPG to Sager missiles at a density of approximately 55 anti-tank weapons per front kilometer. Following the disastrous outcome of October 8th, IDF Chief of Staff Elazar ordered that no further attacks be initiated in the next days until the reserve divisions were fully organized for battle and the plan for the continuance of the war had been conceived. There was one exception, and that was evacuation of the few Mauzim strongholds on the waterline that had not already been taken over by the Egyptians. General Sharon exploited this narrow crack to the best of his ability to initiate aggressive moves. The division sector was the southern subsector of the canal's front. You can see the deployment of the division. This is our brigade, the 421st Brigade. We were holding this line at a place called, at hills, a dune ridge called Ziona on the Tassa Ismailia Central Road. The 600th Brigade, our twin brigade, I could say, reserve brigade, held this area on the ridge of Hamadia and Kishuf. We had in the 143rd third brigade was a mechanized brigade originally, the 875th brigade. It was a brigade of, they had 1 battalion of Shermans and 2 armored infantry battalions. And they were sent to the southern sector. And in return, we actually took over, I mean the 143rd, took over the 14th brigade, the brigade that Emauel originally belonged to. And this was the brigade that actually took the full brunt of the Egyptian attack in the first two days. So this was the sector of our division, the 143, from the central Tassa Ismailia road, this road called Talisman, to the Suez Canal estuary at the Great Bitter Lake. And we were holding exactly the same sector opposite us was the Egyptian 16th Infantry Division. So like I said, our division consisted of 3 tank brigades, our 421st, the 600th, both reservist brigade, and the regular 14th Brigade, which had fought in the first 2 days. The 14th and the 421st had M48A3s. This was asked before, which were originally M48s A1 or A2 or A2C that had been modified in the IDF with a diesel engine and a 105 millimeter cannon. By the way, some of our tanks, almost all the tanks in my company, the original tanks, because I changed a lot, we changed lots of tanks during the attack, during the war, were originally Jordanian M48s caught in the fleet and in the 6 Days War and modified into M48A3s by the IDF. The 600th Brigade was equipped with the then state-of-the-art M60A1 tanks, as was the Divisional Reconnaissance Battalion, which on the third day of the war was attached to the 14th Brigade. They also had M60A1s. And those were the only ones in the IDF. We had about 150 of them all in all, and they arrived in, as far as I know, in 1972. The Egyptian 16th Division opposite us consisted of two infantry brigades, the 112th and the 16th. They had a 16th Division, which had the 16th Brigade, which had the 16th Battalion. That's the way it was organized. And one mechanized brigade, the 3rd Mechanized, and it was reinforced by the Egyptian 14th Tank Brigade from the 21st Armored Division, which were equipped with T-55s. Each infantry or mechanized brigade had an organic tank battalion, so the total tank strength of the 16th Infantry was approximately 220 tanks. In addition, as I said, and has been said before, the infantry units were heavily reinforced with anti-tank weapons to a total of 750 anti-tank weapons in the division. One of the mechanized brigades battalions was equipped with BMP-1s, APCs, at that time state-of-the-art Soviet weapon. The division, the 16th Division, also had two divisional ATGM battalions equipped with Sager missiles, one carried by foot soldiers and the other mounted on BRDM armored cars. As I said, Sharon exploited the license to advance in order to extricate the surviving Maozim garrisons. There were two in his sector. One was Matzmed down here at the Great Bitter Lake, and the other one was Purkan over here near Ismailia. He sent the 421st and the 600th on a coordinated attack to capture the two strategic dunes of Hamutal and Makhshir over here. Allegedly, to gain control that will enable the extrication of the garrison of Maoz Purkan. The 421st took Hamutal temporarily, and the men from Purkan were extricated. Here you see the red arrow, the green arrow, the green broken arrow shows the night travel they did from they stealthily left the Maoz and went during the night through between Egyptian units, and they came up to Hamutal and they were extricated in this operation. But the brigades, the 421st Brigade's 2nd Battalion, the 599th, got entangled on Makhshir North over here and took a heavy beating there. The extrication of the 33 men from Purkan, from the Maoz, all intact, cost 65 casualties, 15 of them killed in action, 7 of them left in the field, and the loss of 6 tanks and 3 APCs. At the same time, the 600s made a failed attempt to take Makhshir South, this area here. Around 10 o'clock, 10 a.m., the Egyptian 3rd Mechanized Brigade reinforced by a tank battalion began attacking the 600th Brigade positions on the Hamadia Dune Ridge. This is the red arrow over here. This is the 3rd Mechanized attack. There were 2 waves of attack. Both were repelled at heavy losses to the attacking brigade. Scores of tanks and APCs remained burning in the area below Hamadia. According to the 600th report, there were about 60 of them. The 3rd Brigade CO, Colonel Sadrak, was killed in the attack. Following the second wave, Sharon decided to counterattack. The 600th descended from its positions, you can see it here, and started an assault to the west and northwest, but was stopped by heavy anti-tank fire. One of its battalions, the 410th, went astray and attacked Machir North. Went all the way, you can see it here. And losing a whole company in the assault. The 600th had approximately 60 casualties in the day's fighting, 33 of which were killed or MIA. It lost 13 of its tanks. The 600th counterattack was meant to be part of a coordinated divisional attack, including the 14th Brigade, and the 421st was also ordered to prepare to join the counterattack in its second phase. In effect, the 14th attack materialized too late, but it managed to circumvent the 600th clash area and reach the shore of the Great Bitter Lake. You can see it here, thus discovering a gap in the Egyptian line between the second and third armies. Sharon tried to convince his superiors that this gap should be utilized to outmaneuver the 16th Division and cross the canal. However, he was ordered by Southern Command to put the brigade back to the Hamadia line over here. The next 4 days saw a few small skirmishes between the two divisions, but in general, there was a stalemate in the front. On October 12th, the Egyptians started to move their armored divisions across the canal. And on the morning of October 14th, this, by the way, is a picture of the Battle of Hamutal on the 9th. You can see a burning Israeli tank on the hill up here. No, we're running too fast. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, something is wrong. Okay. So as I said, the Egyptians started to move their armored divisions across the canal, and on the morning of October 14th, that was already mentioned before, they began a simultaneous five-pronged armored defensive along the front line. The 21st Armored Division, which had crossed the canal the previous day, attacked with two armored brigades towards Tassa, the command post of the Israeli Central. Let me just try and find this map. Bear with me, yeah. Here we see the 14th October attack. This is the Egyptian, the red arrow is the Egyptians' first armored brigade attacking the 14th Israeli, which is holding Hamadia. And this is the Egyptian 14th Armored Brigade attacking the 421st, our brigade, on this area of Tziona, the Talisman Road. And the aim of both brigades was to supposedly to meet and take Tassa over here, which was the headquarters of the central sector. Both Egyptian brigades were badly mauled, each leaving approximately 40 tanks in the field. The CEO of the Egyptian First Armored, Colonel over here, Abu Shadi, and his artillery officer were killed. The two, by the way, we can see if you know a bit about the history of the 6 Days War, when generals and unit commanders were court-martialed after the war because they ran from the battlefield. In this war, you saw commanders, Egyptian commanders, I'm not talking only about battalion level, but I'm talking about brigade level, even division level. You saw them in the front. You saw them fighting on the first lines and getting wounded and getting killed, as you just saw. The two Israeli brigades lost 9 tanks and had 40 casualties, of which 15 were killed in action. During this battle, my battalion, the 257th, was sent to the flank over here of the Egyptian 14th Brigade assault. We deployed in positions north of the attacking force. They were attacking in straight columns not trying to maneuver or to take positions as they were being hit from the front by the other battalion or from the flank by us. They were driving with closed hatches, and I'm not sure they even knew what hit them. Personally, I scored 2 to 3 tanks at the range of 2,800 meters plus minus, but I was not sure these same tanks had not been hit by other tanks from our force as well. Later, we were ordered to go further west to encircle over here, to encircle the Egyptian force. But as we tried to accomplish this, one of my tanks was hit, its commander was killed, and we were called back. To this day, I'm not sure whether this tank was hit from Egyptian or from friendly fire. Egyptian war historians, as well as Egyptian generals who wrote about the war, claimed that the Israeli clear victory on the October 14th battle, which was described as the greatest tank battle since World War II, was achieved due to massive IAF support. Some of them wrote that the bulk of the IAF was thrown in to stop the Egyptian tanks. They claimed massive use of TOW anti-tank missiles, allegedly received in the American airlift. They also described the line of fortified positions from which the Israeli tanks operated in the battle. The truth of the matter is that the 143 3rd Division received no air support at all in the main phases of the battle. The first TOWs, anti-tank missiles, arrived in the American airlift on the evening of the 14th after the battle. And even then, they were not allocated to the 143rd armored units. There were no fortifications at all at the 14th and 421st position lines. The two brigades utilized natural positions in the dune ridges of Hamadia and Ziona, and from these they conducted their battle. The battle and its outcome clearly demonstrated the professional superiority of the Israeli tankers and their commanders over their Egyptian adversaries. Having heavily eroded the Egyptian armor, not only in the 143rd sector, the IDF was now ready for its own crossing operation. The mission was assigned to Sharon's division, which was reinforced by a paratroop brigade, the reserve 247th, as well as additional infantry and artillery units. The division also received an engineer regiment consisting of 2 battalions of Unifloat pontoon ferries and 1 battalion of Gillois self-prepared ferry units and 1 unit operating a roller bridge. At noon of the 15th, Sharon gave the final orders group for the operation, codenamed Stout-Hearted Knights. You see the plan over here. The operation would start with a feint attack by the 600th over here. North of the operations planned breakthrough, while the 14th Brigade would open a corridor over here. Would open a corridor to the crossing site at the Versoix over here, just north of the canal estuary at the Great Bitter Lake. 247th paratroopers would then pass through the corridor like this and cross the canal in rubber boats. Meanwhile, the 421st, our brigade, which was assigned to tow and bring all the heavy crossing equipment forward through the corridor opened by the 14th Brigade, would bring the rolling bridge to the waterfront, bridge the canal in an assault bridging operation, and start transferring its tanks to the west bank of the canal. By the morning, the division would have a bridgehead on the other bank. The operation began at sunset. The 600th feint attack was very clumsily carried out, so it had little effect. The 400th Brigade, the 14th Brigade managed to slip quietly up to this area, more or less. I mean, it made this movement. And and it opened the corridor for the paratroopers. But then it got entangled in a bloody battle in the Tier 2 lexicon right here in what was called in the heart of the compound called the Chinese Farm. By the morning, the 14th suffered 121 KIA and lost 58 of its 93 tanks. Here you can see the picture of the battlefield at Tier 2 lexicon. You can see Egyptian and Israeli tanks, one next to the other, and they were all destroyed, of course, and they were firing at each other range zero, or a few meters. A little after midnight, the paratroopers started crossing the canal in the rubber boats, and at 01:30 they radioed the code word Acapulco, which signified they established a small bridgehead on the west bank. So you see the movement of the paratroopers, and this is the bridgehead. In this area, they established a small bridgehead in the morning, while the 14th established a line around here. Actually, this presents the situation a bit later. In the morning, the 14th was holding approximately this line. And back to my personal experience. At 8:30 p.m., the evening before, the 10 tanks of my company got connected to the rolling bridge and started the Sisyphic ordeal of the towing. The roller bridge, which was 180 meters long, was planned to be assembled in the plain behind the Suez Canal and to be towed a few hundred meters on solid ground to be thrown into the canal's water, where its weight would push it to reach the far bank autonomously, enabling the tanks to cross over it in minutes. It was not built or planned to be towed through 19 kilometers of steep dune hills and compelled to cross on its route the main artery road of the operation, crammed with units, vehicles, with other equipment. The towing continued all night with intervals imposed on us due to the battle's development in front of us. We started towing with 10 tanks and ended up with 16 towing tanks plus 2 assisting bulldozers. Twice, when we passed the top of a dune ridge and started downhill, the bridge would gain momentum and climb the forward towing tanks, one of them mine. It was quite frightening to see this 400-ton monster running at you out of control, stop on the tanks behind. Here you can see my company towing the bridge. You can only see the front of it. And in the morning of the first light of the October 16th. Finally, early in the morning, a hookup connecting one of the tanks to the bridge broke and the towing was stopped for repairs. In any case, we could not have gone much further because the towing route ahead of us was still controlled by elements of the Egyptian 16th Division. In 10 hours of towing, we only managed to advance the bridge less than 5 kilometers out of the 19 kilometers from the site of its assembly to the point where it was expected to be thrown into the water. Meanwhile, another one of the brigade's battalions, the 264th, was in charge of the ferry bridge battalions. 2 of its companies were towing 24 complete unifloat pontoon ferries, but this force was still far behind and was stuck in the huge traffic jam created by hundreds of vehicles from multiple units, all converging on a single narrow road leading to the crossing area, the Akavish Road. The 3rd company was escorting the battalion of Gillois self-propelled ferries. The Gillois were the bastard child of the Engineer Corps crossing arsenal, designated only for backup and secondary use west of the canal. Now they were the only crossing means available. They managed to bypass all the convoys of vehicles jamming the Akavish road by deviating to the dunes along the road. And at 0400, they arrived at the crossing point in the Versoir. It took them 2 hours to convert 15 Gillois into 5 ferries, and they started to load the 10 tanks that escorted them across to the other side. The small bridgehead was now secure. Here you can see 2 of the 264th Battalion's tanks, the 10 first tanks that crossed the canal, crossing on a Gillois ferry. You can see the columns of smoke over here. My battalion, the 257th, received an order around 7:30 in the morning to disconnect from the rolling bridge and run to the Versoir to cross on the Gillois ferries and join the force at the bridgehead. At this time, the battalion consisted of 2 tank companies and an armored infantry company mounted on M113 APCs. As we were speeding on Akavish Road at maximum speed, we entered the kill zone of a Sager 80 GM ambush. 3 tanks, mine, which was the lead tank, the battalion CO's, who was 4th or 5th in the column, and another tank of my company, whose commander was killed. The battalion commander was seriously wounded. The brigade CO, Erez, who was also in the column, took over and led the force to the Versoir. There, they crossed the canal on board the Gillois ferries. On the other side, the force was reorganized. 1 tank company was ordered to join the paratroopers. The 2 other companies and the armored infantry company set out as a task force under Erez's command. Their mission was to destroy SAM anti-aircraft bases that prevented the IAF from operating in the canal zone. In 5 to 6 hours, the force conducted a daring raid, destroying 3 SAM bases. You see this sort of flower, this one and this one and this one, they represent SAM missile bases, which were destroyed by this task force, by this raid. And they also destroyed the mechanized battalion over here, sent against them. As well as artillery, bunkers, and military installations, and scores of military vehicles they encountered along the 55 kilometers route, including 2 vehicles transporting frag rockets. The force then withdrew back to the bridgehead at the Versoir. Here you can see the whole maneuver. During the next 8 days, October 17th to 24, the fighting continued on both sides of the canal. Okay, we'll do this. On the east side, the 14th and the 600th Brigades fought a continuous battle in an effort to widen the bridgehead corridor. The 3-day Battle of the Chinese Farm ended on the 18th, when the 14th Brigade finally managed to push north the remnants of the 16th Infantry Brigade from the 16th Division, which fought heroically throughout this campaign. One of the 16th Battalion commanders was Hussein Tantawi, who in later years became the de facto Egyptian head of state in 2011 to 2012 after the ousting of Mubarak. On the 19th, the 14th Brigade crossed the canal and was the first unit crossing it over the rolling bridge. Which was finally brought to the water the previous evening by one of the 600th battalions. Here you see the first tank of the 14th Brigade crossing over the rolling bridge, and this is Colonel Amnon Reshev, the brigade CO. And here you see how it looked from, this is the rolling bridge, and you see how it looked from the air and how it looked on the photograph. The 600th, over here, we're talking about the 5 last days of the war, 7 last actually. continued its pressure north in an attempt to reduce the enclave held by the Egyptian 16th and 21st Divisions on the East Bank. The final battle in this arena took place on October 21st in the Missouri compound. It's here. The attack failed at a very high cost to the brigade. One of its battalions, the 410th, was left with 4 tanks. This was the last attempt to decimate the area controlled by the Egyptian Second Army. On October 22nd, the 600th was the first Israeli unit to ever absorb a Scud missile when a Scud fell in the 410th Battalion headquarters company's park, killing 7. Meanwhile, on the West Bank, the 143rd units continued to push north. You can see it all over here. The division was reinforced by the regular IDF paratroop brigade, the 35th, together with several reserve paratroop battalions. The 2 paratroop brigades and the 14th Armored continued to advance on both banks of the Sweet Water Canal, which runs parallel to the Suez Canal. The landscape in this area resembled the jungle somewhat like Vietnam, so the advance was at a very slow pace. The Egyptians put up a very strong defense around the village of Serapheum over here. They brought their elite commando and paratroop units to that arena, and it took the 143rd forces 3 days of fierce fighting, October 17th to 19th, to clear this obstacle and be able to continue north. Before the war, the Egyptians had built very high ramps overlooking the Israeli side as positions for tanks and Sager ATGMs to support the crossing. I think Emauel talked about it before. Now the advancing tanks of the 14th Brigade took advantage of those ramps over here to support the 600th push north on the East Bank. Meanwhile, the Egyptians flooded part of the area, which further delayed the advance. 143rd unit continued to push north towards the city of Ismailia, over here. But Sharon's wish to take Ismailia did not materialize until the final ceasefire was declared on October 24th. At the same time, the 421st Division was operating in the open area west of the Sweetwater Canal Strip. Here, tanks could deploy and advance quickly, and the brigade took control of quite some expanse, clearing more SAM missile site as it went. As part of this operation, my company ended the war in the furthest, over here, in the furthest northwestern corner of the territory the IDF seized on the West Bank. We were at the point on the Cairo-Ismailia road, not 101 kilometers from Cairo, but 99 kilometers. You see the road sign says 99 kilometers to Cairo. So this was the final deployment of both armies at the end of the war. You see, this is the line of the Second Army forces that remained on the east bank of the canal. This is the Third Army, which is surrounded by our forces. And this blue line is the line of our forces at the end of the war in Egypt. And back to my own experience. So here is the 99th kilometer photo, and this is where we ended the war, right here. I would like to thank Nitzan Shapira. I don't know if he's in the crowd here, who prepared the maps for this presentation. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Oded, you'll have to stop sharing your screen. There's a button at the top.
Stop share, yeah.
That was just amazing. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
There is a question. Let me see here. It says, great photos, same question. Did the US M40, I don't know how to say this, M48A3 tanks you used work well overall?
Well, we thought they were the best tank in the world. We thought, by the way, they were better than the M60A1s because they were smaller, they were quicker, they had much, they had a few advantage of a few miles per hour over the M60A1s, and they were a smaller target.
Mhm. What was your experience with junior officers and NCOs emerging as leaders during this conflict?
Well, in my unit, as well as in other units, we ended the war with some tank commanders, which usually were sergeants, as platoon commanders. And then after the war, we sent them to reserve officers courses, and they returned as officers. So yes, we certainly had that experience. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mm.
Let's see. Here's another question that came in from Rob Risberg. Did you ever discuss the war with your former enemies in the Egyptian army?
Well, I've been trying for several years now, and I'm getting no response. I'm doing research in the last years. I also published a book about part of what I was telling you now. And I was trying to contact Egyptian officers and didn't have much success. I did reach, thanks to Pesach, who is going to talk after me, some published memoirs of officers in the Egyptian 112th Brigade, which we fought in this area of Hamutal and Machir. There's a book by the brigade commander, which Pesach translated very much for me, really, for my research. He was called the Adel Yusri, Colonel Adel Yusri. He was also in the very front line, and he was already wounded on October 8th. He lost a leg, and but he participated in all the debriefings of the brigade after the war, and he wrote a book. And there's a book by one of his platoon commanders, which is exceptionally interesting. But my attempts to contact Egyptian researchers or officers did not succeed. And one interesting thing is there's an Egyptian historian who doesn't live in Egypt. I think he's in Oxford now, and he's called Khaled Fahmy. And he wrote an article in El Aram, which is I think the most popular newspaper in Egypt to this day. He wrote an article in 2014 complaining that the Egyptian researchers of the war have to rely on materials released by our archives, the Israeli archives, because the Egyptians are not releasing any documents at all. And I wrote to him a few months ago to ask him if this was still the situation. He said yes. So it's very hard to get to Egyptian sources, and it's very hard to contact people who fought against us. I understand some of my commanders, like Chaim Erez, who were in American military colleges, like Emauel described earlier, did meet some of our opponents in the war during the year of studying in the US Army.
How would you compare the performance of the M48 to the Centurion tanks, to the British Centurion tanks?
There's a big war going on in the IDF, especially our generation, between the Patton people and the Centurion people. I don't know, because I never served on a Centurion. I can't make the comparison. I know the technical data, but I don't know. They think that their tank was the best in the world, and I think ours was.
In Europe right now, it's a big concern about being able to bridge, about our bridging capabilities, our ability to bridge the various rivers in Europe if there was ever an event there. What would you recommend based on your experiences with the bridging the canal? What would you like to improve on that?
I think the word is simplicity. I mean, the more sophisticated your equipment is, the bigger the risk is that you'll never get into the water. And this is what happened to us. And diversify. I mean, have several different solutions because some of them might not work. So you should have something that would work.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you very much, sir. We are going to move on to Colonel Pesach Maluvani, and he's going to tell us about the Egyptian perspective. Sir, I'm handing you the microphone. I think you have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Okay, now.
There we go.
Thank you, Larry. Good day to everybody. I'm going to describe you this time the war from the point of view of the Egyptian army, as we say, from the other side of the hill, according to Egyptian sources that I know. As I told you in the previous meeting, I served before the war and during the war in the military intelligence, and I followed the war through the intelligence sources that through my research in the last years, dealing with the war on both fronts, from the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. The Egyptians published a lot of materials about their fighting in the war, in books, memoirs, interviews, etc. As all know, the Yom Kippur War started in noon of the 6th October, is called by the Arabs the Ramadan War or October War. This war was a consequence of the political decision of two Egyptian presidents, Nasser and later Sadat, who replaced him, and the Syrian President Assad, to restore the lands Israel occupied during the Six-Day War in June 1967, the Sinai Peninsula in the south and the Golan Heights in the north. Both decided that what has been taken by force should be restored by force, and a saying that was also supported by the whole Arab world during the Arab Summit in Khartoum, Sudan, at the end of August, beginning September 67. This is to the question of General Swan. In order to achieve their goal, they decided to go to war as partners in order to force Israel to fight in parallel on both fronts, and by this to split its forces so that each of their armies will be able to cope with the forces that will operate against them. The Egyptians, as well as the Syrians, put all their efforts to build a new army after the tremendous defeat in 1967 and prepare it with sufficient weapons and training so it will be able to fulfill its historic mission. President Sadat was a great architect of this war. He decided to initiate a military move in order to take the political situation vis-à-vis Israel out of its stalemate and freeze, and to involve the United States in the diplomatic process that will follow the war in order to get Sinai Peninsula back from the Israeli occupation, and of course also to restore their national honor, especially their armed forces honor that was badly beaten in '67 war. For this purpose, Sadat needed three things: a patron power that will help him to organize his army after his defeat, equip it with advanced weapons and train it for its mission. This was the role of the Soviet Union to do. The second element was a skilled high command, a group of skilled generals who will support him with this idea and fulfill his strategic goal. And this he found in the war minister he appointed in late 1972, General Ahmed Ismail Ali, and Chief of General Staff since mid-1971, the famous General Saaduddin Shazli, and also General Gamassi, the Director of Operations, General Mubarak, Commander of the Air Force, and others. He needed also partners in the Arab world to stand with him in his huge project. The first and most important partners were the Syrians, of course, whose President Assad was eager to get back the Golan that he lost in '67, being the Syrian defense minister, and I described it in previous presentation. All others, like Libya's Gaddafi, the Iraqis and the Saudis, were important partners to join into this scheme, mostly because their important contribution in money and in forces. The cooperation with Syria continued from the beginning, when both presidents met and agreed to go to war together in order to achieve their goals. The Egyptians set up a common headquarters that commanded both armies under the command of General Ahmed Ismail Ali, the Egyptian war minister, who coordinated between the plans and preparations of both armies and common timetable of the war, D-Day and H-hour. Both countries started to build their armies as new ones, equipped with new weapons delivered by the Soviet Union in order to give them the capability to cope with the enemy, the Israeli army, especially the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli armor. First, they put a great effort to raise the low morale of their troops after the great defeat in '67, especially in the Air Force. Second, they organized their forces, especially the ground forces, in a different way. The Egyptians built two field army headquarters that were deployed along their new defense line on the west bank of the Suez Canal, and also organized the general headquarters reserve forces. Each field army included several infantry divisions on the first echelon, 3 divisions in the second army that was deployed on the northern part of the front, and 2 divisions in the third army that was deployed on its southern part. The second echelon of both armies included 2 divisions each, a mechanized and an armored, for conducting counterattacks in defense. On both edges were deployed forces of 2 independent headquarters, the Port Said sector north to the Second Army and the Red Sea Command south of the Third Army, each with independent infantry brigades and commando forces. The General Headquarters Reserve included a mechanized division, 6 commando groups, and 3 paratrooper brigades, as well as several artillery brigades, engineering and bridging brigades, and other units of all branches. Since the '67 war, the Egyptian armed forces grew more than twice in size. 5 infantry and 3 mechanized divisions compared to 4 infantry divisions in '67, and 2 armored divisions compared to 1 in '67. The Egyptian army was based mostly on infantry forces, about 30 brigades, part of them mechanized, equipped by, supported by 10 armored brigades. 3 of them were General Headquarters independent brigades, equipped with advanced T-62 tanks. All the others were equipped with T-54-55 tanks and also some T-34 tanks. Altogether, more than 2,200 tanks. It is interesting to notice that their infantry divisions were short of organic armored brigades, like the Syrians did, and they had to allocate to them brigades from the mechanized divisions and armored divisions from the second echelon. Their firepower was increased by about 2,000 artillery pieces of all kinds, mostly towed, Frog or Luna surface-to-surface rockets, and a great amount of anti-tank weapons, guns, and especially the new anti-tank missile called in Russian the Malyutka, or Sakel as it is called by NATO, used by their infantry as well as by their armored personnel carriers, BMPs and BRDMs, and also great quantities of RPG launchers as well. To support their operations, they purchased new bridging equipment and different engineering equipment, great numbers of vehicles, and many other types of weapons and equipment of all kinds. Their air force grew as well in size and in power, as it built additional air bases, air brigades, and squadrons, equipped with more aircraft of all kinds, including heavy bombers of Tupolev 16 type, and a great number of helicopters, mostly for their commando force that they built for operations behind enemy lines. Altogether, it consisted about 400 combat aircraft, fighters, and bombers. Most important was their success in building their air defense, especially in their forward defense belt, which they succeeded to establish by moving forward their missile batteries on August 7, 1970, the last day before the ceasefire of the war of attrition went into effect. This system included, on the eve of the war, 135 missile batteries, or as they called it, battalions, in 22 air defense brigades, and a great number of anti-air artillery battalions and portable SA-7 missiles. Also, the Navy increased its strength since 1967 based on the purchase of different kinds of vessels, destroyers, missile boats, submarines, etc. The Navy operated from its bases in two arenas, the Mediterranean Sea as well as the Red Sea. After the end of the war of attrition, the Egyptians had plenty of time to prepare their forces for war. Firstly, they had to improve their intelligence about the enemy, and they did a great job on this field. Secondly, they decided to improve their training system and put the emphasis on training on the offensive rather than the defensive, especially on crossing water obstacles. Thirdly, they started to plan the operation itself. The Soviet Union had a very important role in supporting them by supplying the weapons and equipment they needed, assisting them by advisors and experts in order to absorb those weapons and their fighting doctrine properly, assisting them to build their new defense line west of the Suez Canal right after the 67 war, and giving them, of course, political backing. President Sadat's strategy was to conduct a limited war, only within the boundaries of the Sinai Peninsula. He also wanted that the planning and fighting will be done by the Egyptian armed forces alone, in order to show their own capabilities. He didn't want the Soviets to be involved in the planning and preparations for the war, as it happened in Syria. This was one of the main reasons that stood behind his decision to expel the Soviet advisors and independent forces from Egypt in July 1972. This was also a preliminary step in the change of his policy, moving from the close relations with the Soviet Union bloc to new relations with the United States. The Egyptian plan of war went through several phases, as Gideon mentioned it, from a grand plan that was aimed to conquer the whole Sinai Peninsula in several phases, to a minor plan that included the crossing of the canal, conquering the Israeli defense line, the Bar-Lev line, with its fortifications, and establish a firm and strong bridgehead on the eastern bank in Sinai, in the width of 10 up to 15 kilometers, and then hold the advance of their forces, which they called an operational pause. Sadat and his generals knew that the Egyptian army is not able to conquer the whole Sinai Peninsula, and if their forces will move into the depths of it, they will get out of their air defense missile umbrella, which will put them under the mercy of the Israeli Air Force, what really happened during the attack of October 14th. Sadat also sent a message to Dr. Kissinger on October 7th, promising him that he has no intention to move eastward and to expand the scope of the war. He also proved before the war operations in Sinai Peninsula only, and not against targets in Israel itself, based also on the advice he got from Chairman Brezhnev. He didn't want a total war with Israel and didn't want to hit targets in the depths of Israel, so Israel will not have to retaliate by hitting targets in the depths of Egypt. The launch of the CAPT missile to Tel Aviv at the start of the war was a mistake. The Egyptian plan was based on a simultaneous surprise attack on both fronts, Syria and Egypt, using a deception plan to assist the concealment of intentions and preparations toward war. The plan included a preliminary air and artillery strike, followed by 3 phases. The first one was the amphibious operation, crossing the canal by 5 infantry divisions, reinforced by a tank brigade each, commando battalions, and artillery and engineering support from the army and general headquarters level. Each division consisted of 2 infantry brigades and 1 mechanized brigade, a divisional tank battalion, and anti-tank forces. Each brigade consisted of organic tank artillery and anti-aircraft artillery battalions, as well as anti-tank companies. The whole infantry mess was filled with anti-tank weapons, RPG launchers and Sakel missiles, in order to be able to stand against the Israeli armed forces until the heavy breach bridges will be laid and the tanks will be able to cross the canal to Sinai. The second phase was to conquer and destroy the Bar-Lev line, the Israeli strongholds along the eastern bank of the Suez Canal, which for the Egyptians was a symbol of the occupation of the Sinai in the 67 war. And the third phase was to the enlargement of the bridgehead in order to block the coming Israeli counterattack. The possibility to move eastward to the strategic phases in Sinai, the Mitle and Gidi, what was called by them the development of the attack eastward, was an option, but no one on the Egyptian command saw it happening. And there was not a real plan and intention to do it, as we saw it on October 14. The Egyptians had a great advantage in their order of battle compared to the Israeli forces deployed in Sinai. They had 5 infantry divisions in the first echelon of both armies and 5 other divisions, 2 armored and 3 mechanized, in the second echelon and the GSU reserve, versus only 4 Israeli brigades, 3 armored as it was described, and 1 infantry. Altogether, the attacking force had a great firepower capability to establish a bridgehead on the other bank of the canal. The Air Force, and especially the air defense, will be responsible to deal with the Israeli air attacks and also support the ground forces and defend their air bases and vital objects in Cairo area and all over the country. Several days before the start of the war, the Egyptians sent a naval task force made of destroyers and submarines to the southern part of the Red Sea in order to conduct a naval blockade on Israel on this naval sailing route, as well as on the sailing routes in the Mediterranean. During the week that preceded the war, the Egyptian army conducted a phase exercise as part of its deception plan to cover its intentions based on the Soviet experience from their surprise invasion to Czechoslovakia in August 68. Egypt and Syria agreed to start the war at 14 p.m. on Saturday, 6 October, as I mentioned, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day on Jewish calendar. This by itself contributed to the quick response of the Israeli Defense Forces. Everybody in Israel stayed at home at this day, and all the routes were open and empty of traffic, which eased the process of recruiting the reservists and moving forces and equipment by roads. The Egyptians insisted that the war will start at an unusual hour, which will enable them few hours of daylight to perform the main phase of the crossing, while the laying of the bridges and the crossing of their armor units to the east bank will take place at night hours in order to give them maximum protection from Israeli Air Force attacks. Although it was not quite suitable for the Syrians, Assad accepted it and the war went on its underway. As it was scheduled and coordinated with the Syrians, about 200 planes, Egyptian planes, took off from their Air Force bases and hit a variety of targets in Sinai Peninsula only, followed by an artillery preparation attack of about 2,000 barrels. The Ramadan or October War started. Sadat was now relaxed that the Israelis didn't perform a preemptive airstrikes that he was afraid of, especially on his Air Force, which he was afraid that might happen. And after a short time, he phoned the Soviet ambassador in Cairo and announced him that the Egyptian army crossed the canal and raised the Egyptian flag along the Israeli Bar-Lev line and asked him to report it to the Soviet leadership. For the Egyptians, this operation was a great success. After they invested all their capabilities and efforts during the previous 7 years since 67 war, the Soviets were very skeptic that the Egyptian army is able to perform such a huge operation and told the Egyptians that they assess that their Air Force will suffer between 30 to 35% losses performing the first wave, and in the second one, even more. The Egyptians themselves estimated that on the first day, they will suffer about 10,000 killed and about 30,000 injured. But on early morning of October 7th, they managed to transfer to Sinai all 5 infantry divisions, about 100,000 men with their weapons, including 1,000 tanks, including 2 HANDOUT T-62 tanks and 1,300 APCs, armored personnel carriers and vehicles, while their losses were 280 men, 5 aircraft and 20 tanks. The Israeli losses were uncomparable. However, a misshape occurred to them when the commander of the Air Force, Hosni Mubarak, late president, decided to send his helicopters with the commando forces to Sinai without an escort of fighter aircraft, which caused them many losses in helicopters and commando fighters at the same day. The fate of the Bar-Lev line was decided, and the Egyptian infantry and commando forces succeeded to conquer most of the Israeli strongholds, except one on the northern edge of the canal that was situated east of Port Fuad and Port Said. The battle was developed between the Egyptian infantry equipped with deadly anti-tank weapons and the Israeli tank units, which came to rescue the soldiers who were besieged at the Bar-Lev strongholds. The Egyptians started their next step to enlarge and unify their divisional bridgeheads and block Israeli unorganized counterattacks. They succeeded to free the city of Kantara on the northern part of the eastern bank of the canal on the evening of October 7th, and completed their mission of building their bridgehead and defense system on the eastern bank of the canal according to the doctrine and plan, conducting battles against Israel's scattered and company battalion size counterattacks, waiting for the expected Israeli main counterattack that didn't come. After the war started, they assessed that Israel will complete the call-up of its reserve force at least 24 hours from the beginning of the war, and will be able to launch its main counterattack very soon on October 7th. The Egyptian intelligence even assessed that it is going to happen even earlier, but it didn't happen. And even the failed attack on October 8th was not the real counterattack they were waiting for. They understood quickly that Israel is still under the influence of their surprise attack, and that's why its response is so unorganized and limited in size, but very costly in losses, which they called them fixing attacks that were designed to fix the situation and prevent their forces from advancing farther east. The Egyptian concept was that the Israelis will concentrate their efforts toward the Syrian front first, because it is much more dangerous for them, and afterwards they will come with all their power against Egypt and the Egyptian army in Sinai. They feared to be dragged by the Israelis to fight against them outside of their air defense missile umbrella. Their understanding that Israel is unable to launch its main counterattack at this phase led them to ignore the possibility that the IDF is preparing its counterattack by crossing to the west bank of the canal, which was their surprise. In the meantime, the situation on the Syrian front deteriorated, and the Syrians, who didn't understand why the Egyptian army stopped its advance eastward to the passes, as it was agreed between the two leaders after crossing the canal, and started to ask questions and to press the Egyptians to fulfill their part in the common plan. Very quickly, they were joined also by the Soviets, who thought, as the Syrians, that the Egyptians should continue their advance eastward. That will help to ease the Israeli pressure on the Syrian forces in the Golan. The Syrians were also alarmed because of the Israeli penetration into Syrian territory on October 11th, and they feared that Israel is threatening their capital, Damascus. This pressure brought President Sadat to decide to renew the advance of the Egyptian forces eastward, and he ordered the army to prepare itself to renew the attack on October 13th toward the passes. This was the first Egyptian major mistake in this war. By taking the attacking forces out of their air defense missile umbrella and sending them to perform a mission, they didn't plan and didn't prepare themselves well from the beginning. The army top generals, including General Shazli, the chief of general staff, resisted this idea, but very quickly they understood that they have no choice but to fulfill the order. The attack was delayed to October 14th, and in that morning, 5 Egyptian brigades moved out of their positions to perform this decision, 4 armored and 1 mechanized. 2 armored brigades were transferred for this operation from the western side to the eastern side of the canal. The Israeli forces were aware of this coming move and were prepared to meet the Egyptian forces. The battle between the two sides ended up with a disaster for the Egyptian army by losing about at least 250 tanks and especially suffering a heavy blow to their 21st Armored Division, one of the two in the Egyptian army. The beaten forces retreated back to their safe haven in their former positions. The results of this battle influenced badly the Second Army commander, who suffered a heart attack, as well as President Sadat and the Egyptian High Command, and also the Syrians, President Assad and his generals in Damascus, who understood that they lost their hope to win this war and to take the Golan back. This setback kept the Egyptian army busy in the following days by heavy fighting in Sinai, what we call the Battle of the Chinese Farm, initiated by the Israeli command that planned to perform its main counterattack by crossing the canal westward into Egyptian soil in order to encircle the Egyptian forces in Sinai. On October 16th, President Sadat and the Egyptian High Command were surprised by the announcement of Prime Minister of Israel, Ms. Golda Meir, that Israeli forces crossed the canal and are operating on the west side of it, or in other words, on African soil. This was just after he delivered his speech before the Egyptian parliament, telling them about the Egyptian victory in the war. It seems that the front headquarters that was involved in this situation, the Second Field Army, didn't conduct this development as it should be, and it took time for the Egyptians to understand what really is going on their soil, and that why the decisions taken by the decision makers on all levels relating to this development were not appropriate. From here start a new phase in the war, as the Egyptian army had to fight now on two fronts, while the size of the Israeli forces operating against the forces west of the canal is growing all the time. The Egyptians were now worried because of several threats developing from this new development. The threat to encircle their forces that are deployed in Sinai, the threat of destroying their air defense missile system on the western side of the canal, which was started already, and the threat to take cities of Ismailia and Suez on the canal, as well as the possibility that Israeli forces might move toward Cairo. The Soviet tried to persuade President Sadat to agree to a ceasefire and even sent Prime Minister Kosygin to Cairo to speak with him, but Sadat was still stubborn and refused to do so, and ordered the army to attack what they called the breach of the Versoir, where our forces penetrated or crossed the canal to Egypt on the eastern side of the canal. Also, some of the generals thought that the attack should be performed on the western side of it, but not on the eastern. But Sadat didn't want to transfer even one soldier from Sinai to the western side, so that it will not be considered a success for Israel and a failure for Egypt. So the Egyptians decided to carry out on October 17th a dual-pronged attack on the breach area by forces from the Second Army, represented by the 21st Armored Division, or what had been left of it, from the north, and by the 25th Independent Armored Brigade, representing the Third Army from the south. The battle that evolved ended up with another defeat to the Egyptian forces that were beaten heavily by the Israeli forces. The Israeli forces on the west side of the canal were now free to expand their bridgehead and to advance toward their targets, Ismailia in the north and the city of Suez in the south, which put the Egyptian army and command on the horns of the dilemma, where to send their reserve forces to protect Ismailia or the city of Suez. Ismailia got the priority, and the Third Army forces couldn't stop the advance of the Israeli forces southward to the city of Suez. Against the background of these developments, President Sadat decided to accept the proposal of ceasefire and told it also to President Assad that as Israel gets the US support, and that's why he cannot fight Israel and the United States together. Assad tried to persuade him to continue fighting, but Sadat refused. The last phase of the war was very dramatic. The United Nations Security Council decided on ceasefire on October 22nd, but Israel continued the fighting in order to complete the siege of the Third Army and to take the city of Suez. The Battle of Suez ended up with a defeat to Israeli forces that evacuated the city after paying a heavy price in losses, but the siege of the Third Army forces in Sinai was completed, another setback for the Egyptian army. A few words about the Soviet involvement in the war. As I mentioned, the Soviets supported both countries, Egypt and Syria, with all kinds of weapons. They also trained their armies with support of thousands of military advisors and technicians, and also supplied them with good intelligence and were involved in some of their planning, especially in Syria. The Egyptians and the Syrians admitted that without the Soviet assistance, they wouldn't be able to go to war. During the war, the Soviets supported both countries with weapons sent by air and sea to fulfill their losses. The Soviets also put on alert some of their long-range missiles in Ukraine and some submarines in the Mediterranean to launch missiles on strategic targets in Israel if Israel will threaten the Arab capitals or hit strategic targets like the Swan dam or use non-conventional weapons. They also plan to perform an amphibian landing of forces in Port Said in order to defend the city and bring there one of their airborne divisions. This plan was finally abolished. They were also concentrated a huge naval force and were prepared to fight against the US and NATO fleets. All this brought the United States to announce the what is called DEFCON 3, the nuclear alert situation, because of all those Soviet preparations. To sum up, Israel had to fight not only against two overwhelming Arab armies who opened war against her in full surprise, but behind them stood the Soviet superpower that assisted them with almost everything they needed to go to war as part of the Cold War in those days. I want to show you now some maps and pictures to make things much more clear. One moment. Where is the share?
The share button is at the bottom of the screen in green. There's a button.
Oh, yes, okay. Starting with the High Command, the Egyptian High Command, you can see here President Sadat, he was Supreme Commander. Near him stands his War Minister, Ahmed Ismail Ali. General Gamassi, the head of operations, is here. Near him stands General Mubarak, in those days commander of the Air Force, and General Fuad Nassar, head of the intelligence. Missing here is the Chief of General Staff, General Shazli. You can see him here with Sadat and with the War Minister. I would say the three leading figures in this war, preparing and handling, were the War Minister, Ahmed Ismail Ali, who is called Field Marshal of the victory, General Shazli, who was in better relations with him, and Sadat finally dismissed him, and General Gamassi, who replaced Shazli as Chief of Staff, and later replaced also Ahmed Ismail Ali as War Minister. Here we can see on the right side of the map, they describe the concentration of all the forces before the start of the war. We can see here the Second Army that has the most of the forces, the Third Army in the south, the sector of the Port Said sector that had two infantry brigades, and here in the south, the start of the Red Sea Command, which prolonged down to up to the Sudanese border. This map shows you the deployment of the air defense missile belt, which they forwarded in the end of the attrition war. You can see all the systems deployed here, and they cover about 30 or more kilometers in the east of the Suez Canal, which gives them the maximum coverage of air defense when the forces invaded or crossed this canal and came into Sinai. Here you can see the map of the crossing of the canal. You can see one of the brigades of the Port Said that entered the Sinai in the northern part. Now you can see the 18 Infantry Brigade on the northern part of the Second Army, reinforced by the 15 Independent Tank Brigade with T-62, the 2nd Infantry Division supported with a tank brigade of the 23rd Mechanized Division of the 2nd Echelon of the 2nd Army, and the 16th Infantry Division supported by one of the tank brigades of the 21st Armored Division. And the same in the 7th Army sector, in the 3rd Army sector, you see the 7th Infantry Division supported by the 25th Independent Armored Brigade with T-62s also, and the 19th Infantry Division supported by the Armored Brigade of the 6th Mechanized Division. This map shows what happened on the 7th October when they already had organized their divisional headquarters. You can see here 5, and the Israeli forces started together in Sinai and started also the counterattacks. It was described by General Sakel and my friend Oded, which the Egyptians actually were waiting for a major counterattack, but they found themselves needed to block very unorganized, as I say, and small size counterattacks of company and battalion size. Here you have some pictures from the crossing. At the beginning, the infantry and commando crossed the canal on rubber boats like this. When they came here, like the picture, they had to climb the huge ramps or barriers or whatever you call it, sand batteries, in order to get to the top. And in the meantime, also engineering crews had to open gaps in those huge sand batteries with water pumps, which take time. After they did it, they came up and raised, of course, the Egyptian flag along the whole line. And after laying the bridges, the tanks could cross and also logistics could come over. Here you can see one of the gaps they opened with this system. The Bar-Lev line already, you have already seen by Gideon's presentation. I'll go further. Here you can see the operations, the attack on the 14th October. Basically, this is the plan, the original plan. They planned to move actually all the 7 divisions, including 5 infantry and the 2 armored, into the depths, to the passes. But actually, this was only on the map. They didn't train on this scheme and didn't plan it in details. The Syrians, also the Egyptians in their memories say that the Syrians were very anxious because they felt that this is not a true thing a plan, like the Egyptians showed them the plan of the crossing of the canal. This was more fake than true. And actually what really happened, that Sadat wanted the Soviets and the Syrians to leave him alone and lift off the pressure. So he ordered to make a very minor operation, sacrificing those tanks. He actually didn't understand, thought that this will be the results. And you can see here the 5 efforts of those brigades who were participating in this attack on the 14th October, which ended up with a disaster. Here, the Israeli crossing, part of the pictures, you saw it at the beginning with barges and so on, and later with the 2 types of bridges we organized. And here you can see again what you saw with the Israeli crossing to the other side and the 2 main efforts, north to Ismailia and south to Suez. And here is actually the story of what we call the 25th Armored Brigade that was sent from the 3rd Army bridgehead toward north to attack the bridge, what they call the Versailles Bridge, but was encircled by our forces and almost destroyed. And the same happened also to the force of the 21st Armored Division that tried to operate from the Second Army bridgehead southward and were also stopped, and most of the division was actually annihilated. Thank you very much.
Pesach, if you could please click the stop sharing button. It's at the top of your screen.
Excuse me?
The stop sharing button to stop sharing your screen. I think it's at the top of your screen.
It should be a red button at the top of your screen.
Ah. Yes,
There.
okay.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, sir. I think Cindy has a question.
I do. So from the first Yom Kippur War seminar, we talked about all of the tanks that the Syrians sent towards you in the Northern Command. So why do you think it is that the Egyptians were so well prepared with anti-tank equipment and gear and weapons, and the Syrians were not, if they were all working together?
The answer is very simple. The Syrians had to cross, as I mentioned, between 25 to 30 kilometers. There was no water obstacle between the Golan and the Syrian territory, and they were relying mostly on their armor, thinking that with their armor, and they had much more armor with attacking forces against us, they could finish this attack very quickly.
With numbers.
The Egyptians, on the other hand, had to cross a water obstacle, and their forces, mostly the infantry forces, had to wait many hours till their tanks will come over to Sinai when they will lay down the bridges, and were also afraid that maybe our Air Force will attack the bridges, which really happened, but didn't disturb them actually, and will prevent them of bringing the tanks to Sinai in order to help the infantry divisions. So they needed to, or they fulfilled, as I mentioned, the infantry units from platoon to division and to army with all the types of anti-tank weapons, anti-tank guns, missiles, those Sakel missiles, RPGs, in every place you can find them. And our tank units actually didn't, we already knew their tactics and the weapons they had, but people were thinking that the tanks will be enough to fight the infantry and beat it. But in fact, it didn't happen like this. And the anti-tank systems used, or units used by the Egyptians, were much more successful in blocking our tank units, and the losses we got on the first 24 hours speak for themselves.
Thank you.
I have two questions from David Hill. The first question is, it is well known that there were historically many Israelis who speak Arabic, and it was easy for the Israelis to intercept Arab transmissions, radio transmissions. How was it for the Arab armies in regards to intercepting Hebrew language transmissions?
As I mentioned,
how did you respond? How did the army respond?
They made a great progress in their intelligence system from '67. They operated human sources in Sinai, mostly the Bedouins and others, who gave them a lot of information they needed for the planning. The Soviets gave them the pictures, the air pictures they photographed by the MiG-25 when it was operating during the attrition war. And they built also, they organized also with the help of the Soviets, SIGINT units, a SIGINT system and an EW system, which also used SIGINT to intercept all the networks, the signal networks that IDF operated in Sinai. And not only this, but also the Air Force and the Navy, whatever they could. Now, they sent many people during the time before the war to study Hebrew. I have it from memoirs of people who were doing this job in the Egyptian army in different sectors. And they got a lot of information, especially understood our code maps after they found one of them in one of the places they conquered, and understood where our forces are operating, and also used it to give the artillery better coordinates to hit those places by artillery barrages. The whole system was much more advanced than it was, of course, in '67. Not so much sophisticated, but they had a lot of success. I can tell you one episode which nobody knew it. I also didn't know it until I found it in the memoirs of the Chief of the Intelligence, General Fuad Nassar. On the 18th of October, General Dayan, our defense minister, went to visit the forces on the western bank of Sinai. He went to the Division 162 of General Adan. And while he was there, and this is described in at least 3 or 4 books, in Dayan's book, in Adan's book, in the book of Dayan's adjutant also. Suddenly, 2 helicopters, Egyptian helicopters, appeared and threw barrels that exploded. Dayan writes in his book that he thought that helicopters brought barrels of fuel for the forces, for Egyptian forces that should have been there, but they didn't know that the forces already retreated. But the fact that it exploded showed another thing, that it was actually like air bombs. And what is Chief of Intelligence telling us, that his people who intercepted from our signal networks that Dayan is coming to visit there. And he told it Sadat, and Sadat, and also I believe the war minister and many others also, gave an order to kill Dayan. And he spoke with Mubarak personally to send these 2 helicopters with the barrels in this point where they showed Dayan is there. And this was what they performed. And they were waiting to see the pictures of this operation, and here the announcement that Dayan has been killed with some of the other generals who were in this place. Shows you actually what really achievement they had with intercepting our networks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I'll add one more thing. Last in segment 1, we were told that another solution was that the IMF artillery started transmitting in Romanian and receiving in Hungarian language because they found out, they saw that the Arabs were intercepting the signals in Hebrew and understood it, so they switched to Eastern European language.
No, they spoke Yiddish.
Yeah. So here's another question from David Hill.
Also, the Pakistani pilots who came to Syria at the end of the war and were operating there in the time of the second attrition war in '74, were also afraid that we are intercepting them, and they started to speak Urdu, the Urdu language.
Yeah.
So everybody took an example from your Indians in Second World War.
That's right. That's right. The code talkers. So here's from David Hill. I have read in many books on the Yom Kippur War that before the launch of the attack, there were many warnings of Egyptian or Syrian attacks from many sources, many from human sources and also signal intelligence. Can you explain why these many warnings were ignored by Prime Minister Meir and Defense Minister Dayan and the other IDF?
That's the $64,000 question.
No, I have a good answer. I told you I was the head of the early warning section in our SIGINT unit, and I saw all the information that was collected by our unit and by other intelligence organizations. The 2 weeks before the war, I can tell you that our blood pressure of all of us were going higher and higher and higher every day, because we saw the information coming in and we saw the buildup of the forces on both fronts. The Syrians who brought forces from the depths of the country, the battalion of the bridging that nobody needed, only for the attack, not for the defense. The Sukhoi air bombers who came from T4 to air bases near Damascus, and many other things, and the same on the Egyptian front. The bridging equipment that was close to the canal, and many other things. But someone had a conception that Egypt is not going to war, and Syria will not go to war by itself. Egypt is not going to war because they don't have long-range aircraft. They didn't get from the Soviet long-range aircraft, and the Syrians will not go by themselves, and neglected all the information that came in and showed that this is not the right thing to think. Even on the 5th of October, I personally was, how do you say, I reported the very important information that explained why the Soviets took out their families from Syria and from Egypt. This was an Iraqi, the Iraqi embassy in Moscow was asked by the Iraqi general headquarters, what is going on with the Soviets in Syria and Egypt? And they went to ask the Soviets, and the Soviets told them very quickly, we are taking out the families because Syria and Egypt are going very soon to a war against Israel. But also this information was denied. And some people said, this Iraqi doesn't know anything. And this is not true. But we saw later, 2 days later, or 1 day later, that this was very true. And this is the whole story, showing you that it needs only one general at the top to topple the whole system. And this is what happened.
Wow. So I have one more question from Steve Fixler, and he wrote this earlier. I think it got buried in the questions. So the Egyptians needed the right weather, moonlight, and canal conditions to conduct their attack across the canal and hold the east bank of the canal. Was it just a coincidence that the day of Yom Kippur was perfect timing for them? Did the Egyptians just get lucky that it was Yom Kippur, or were there other days that they could have used?
Well, about Yom Kippur, I told you, this was our luck, that it happened on this day when all the people, all the reservists were at home. We can call them very quickly, and all the roads were open, so we can move units and forces from place to place. But about the times of the attack, the Egyptians prepared 3 groups of dates in May, in September, and in October. Every group hold about 3 days by itself. And the first idea was to get to war in May. But 2 things happened. Also, the Syrian generals told Assad that they are not prepared enough. And the Egyptians, Assad find out in the meeting with Sadat and Ahmed Ismail Ali, that also the Egyptians has some things to get more, for example, ammunition and other things that they need for the war. So he went to Moscow on the 2nd of May and met with Brezhnev. It was a very quick visit, and told Brezhnev, and Brezhnev was asking him, tell me, you are preparing to go to war very soon and you don't have enough ammunition and many other things. The Syrians wanted more SA-6 and also the Egyptians and many other items, so they will be much more sure in their fighting. And he told him, look, in June, I have my summit with President Nixon. I don't want you to start a war before my summit. Otherwise, you will make me much trouble. You should postpone it after the summit. And this is what happened. And then the most appropriate date to do it, because of the elements of the situation of the canal and everything, was in October, and that's why they decided to do it on the 6th of October. It was also in the month of Ramadan, which is according to the Muslim tradition, a month of success, because the Prophet Muhammad had some of his battles in this month and was very successful. And even Saddam Hussein, in his battles against Iran, preferred to do his great operations on the Ramadan month. So he will be successful, and he was successful against the Iranians, as we know. And this was the decision to make it on this day. On what I read in Egyptian sources, they thought that the fact that this was on Yom Kippur didn't so much spoke to them, and they thought that it will be a normal day for the Jews, for the Israelis. They were more concerned about the fact that Israel is going to have new elections very soon, and that the mind of the Israelis, all of them, are busy with these elections, so they don't have in their head anything to watch their preparations to war. And they were succeeded to hide their intentions and the preparations, not only from Israel, from the whole world. Even the Soviets were surprised, and of course, the United States intelligence, European intelligence, everybody. So this was a real secret they succeeded to hide. And although we find out all those pre-war signals, we didn't take them as serious. At least some people in our hierarchy in the intelligence. And Dayan and Golda had no choice but to believe what the heads of the intelligence told them. General Zira was a very, I would say, a very dominant general in the general headquarters. He was also in 56 General Dayan's adjutant, and they know each other for many years. And he was one of the generals whose career was going further, and we're speaking of him also to be the Chief of General Staff, the next one. But here happened what happened. This was only a question of fate, I would say. No, not much, not more than this.
I have a complicated question that's probably more philosophical. To what extent would the Arab countries have attacked Israel had they not been pushed forward by the Soviets?
I would say Sadat was, no one was pushed by the Soviets. This was, as I mentioned, their own plan from the 11th of June 67, that what was taken by force will be restored by force. So Assad was in 67 defense minister and commander of the Air Force. And look what happened to both, to the Syrian army and to the Air Force. And this was what a thing that it goes in his blood and in every part of his body to start a war in order to bring back the honor of his honor, the honor of the Syrian people, the honor of the Syrian army, Air Force, etc. And also the grand strategy of the Arabs till today is to take back what they say is Arab land, to take it back from Israel. And also Sadat, Nasser, before Sadat, this was his strategy, and he got the support of all the Arab countries in the summit of Sudan that say 3 no's: no peace with Israel, no discussion with Israel, and no, I don't remember the third one now. But nothing to do with Israel, only to go, no political and no diplomatic activity, only military activity to get back those lands and bring back also the honor to the Arab nation and to those countries and their armies. Now, the Soviets were against going to war. The Soviets were afraid, you should understand. In 67, it was also a great blow for the Soviets because they were in the Arab armies. They gave them weapons, they trained them, and look how the Arabs operated, nothing. As I wrote in one of my articles that Assad lost the Golan Heights in 1.5 days in 67, and in 4 days in 73. Showed you something how they really operated with all the weapons and all the supplies they had and the overwhelming forces. They attacked our two armored brigades in Golan Heights, for example, which I mentioned in the previous presentation. The Soviets, from the beginning, tried to persuade Sadat to accept the ceasefire. And as I told you in the previous presentation, Assad asked them on the evening of the 7th just to stop the war on the Golan Heights and bring a ceasefire between Syria and Israel. But Sadat refused. And he said, why? He wanted to stop. Let him stop. I will continue. I am successful. The Soviets continued. They were afraid of, first of all, that something will deteriorate to a problem with the United States. It was a Cold War then. And what happened in the Mediterranean when they brought more than 100 combat ships versus the Sixth Fleet and others, the British fleet and others in the area, was very close to I would say, to a kind of striking each other with missiles, aircraft, whatever. Yeah. And this they didn't want, and nobody else want. That's why they also retreated from doing anything that could persuade the other side, the West, that they might do some military steps that will not be good for them. Now, they were also afraid that for the second time, this was also, you should understand that this was also a kind of propaganda war between the two superpowers. Kissinger told the Shah of Iran, when he learned that the Iraqis are going to come to Syria, to make some moves along the Iraqi border, so the Iraqi will be a little problematic in their decision to send forces to Syria. On the other side, the Iraqis asked the Soviets to tell the Iranians not to do anything which can endanger them when they are sending their military to Syria. And the Soviets agreed and sent even or operated a great exercise, military exercise near the Iranian borders. On the other hand, Kissinger, as I then told the Shah to do what he told, and told him, this is in his book, that we shouldn't let again the Soviet weapons to win the American weapons, which happened really on the attrition war when they brought the SA-3 to Egypt and they dropped our Phantoms flown by us, which is American weapon. And nobody in the world, not us and not the Americans, had a real answer to this threat. Mm-hmm. So this was something that Schlesinger and others in the defense ministry didn't want to happen again, that Soviet weapons show that American weapons show that they are inferior to Soviet weapons, which is a real problem was a real problem in the Cold War at that time, even today.
Thank you very much. Any further questions?
Next time.
Yeah, next time. Jeffrey, I'm turning the microphone over to you. For a wrap up, General Swan has taken off to return back to Arlington.
Yes, General Swan's on the road. Oh, he's a busy guy. I want to thank him also. You know, gentlemen, my Hebrew's not as good as yours, obviously. The last time we were that deep into Egypt, we needed God, Moses, and 10 plagues to get us out of there. So I'm glad you made it home. I know it was an intense experience for all of you serving in a war. I remember what mine was like. You never forget it. I can't remember breakfast yesterday, but I remember my war. So General Avidor, General Sakel, Colonel Megiddo, and Colonel Maluvani, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us today. Also want to thank Cindy Newman of Crank Digital Marketing and AUSA, and the Suncoast AUSA President, Eric, thank you very much also. And to my own fellow commander in the Jewish War Veterans, Larry Jasper, thank you for putting this program on.
Thank you, Jeffrey. We have one last part, and that's part 3 of this series. And that's going to be next year when we have a battle ride to Israel. And we'll actually have the opportunity to visit some of the battlefields and visit the Golan Heights and Jerusalem and the Sinai. And so
I again would like to thank everyone. Thank you, Gideon, for putting this all together. Thank you, Cindy, for facilitating. And Jeff, thank you for your great comments. And of course, General Swan is off the air, but appreciate everything he has said and done also. And Christine, I hope we can get a great package together. And Gideon, I look forward to seeing you in May in Israel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Everybody have a great
Fantastic.
rest of your day.
everybody
Thank you
have a
for
great
joining.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.